Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 186. That's PEP or Planet Extra podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, where you can see us on Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV and 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube on the ABC News In-Depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll also find timestamps and show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we're likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PEPCHAS Dr. Dave. If you want to talk, if you want to chat to some fellow peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen right now or in the blurb of the podcast. But if you want to contact me or Lockie the Lackey privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. The address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. If you want to buy merch, that address is www.pepchasdaveshop.com. That's pepchasdaveshop.com. Perfect for Christmas. But for now, let's hear from the fellow who only raises the stakes and inconsequential views when we bait him to. It's journalism teacher, the real Bill Wyman. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Chaz. How are you?
I'm great.
It's a crazy time.
It really is.
Are you fraught?
I'm a little bit fraught. I'm a little fraught, but I'm not fraught about the election. I'm fraught about the fact that I'm never prepared at the moment. Every show I make, I'm always days behind, and I've only read a couple of things.
Yes, but somehow you make it look like you do know. And people should know the amount of work that goes into the shows that you guys put on is just extraordinary. I just imagine that getting ready for next week must be nervous-making as well.
Well, yeah. Honestly, this week's actually my toughest week because I've got 2 shows plus 2 podcasts, and I started the week 2 days behind in my reading, which is, that's like 600 articles. And so anyway, it's a bit of a nightmare, but, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and that's going to be in about 3 weeks' time. So, but Bill, let me ask you, what are you grateful for?
Oh, thanks for asking, Chaz. It really is a time for reflection, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And I think we should really take a moment to recognize that what's going on in America, and of course, which goes on in every democratic country, Australia, the UK included, is a pretty extraordinary process, right? And it drives us all crazy. There are dark things going on. There's been huge disappointments, huge triumphs just in my lifetime. And I didn't even live through things like the Depression or the Second World War, things like that. But it is a pretty extraordinary thing. And it is something that's caused a lot of good in the world. And of course, the actions of our country sometimes cause some pain in the world. But I think most of us can agree that constitutional democracies have done a lot and have helped a lot of people out. And what it brings me to, of course, is that it requires people to participate and get up there and doing. And you know what? If Donald Trump gets reelected next week, it would be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing on so many levels. And at the same time, that's what people get to do. And unfortunately, they're probably going to take the grunt of it if that's what happens. But I think we should recognize that it is a profound process. But I also want to give a shout out to Hamilton, not the musical.
No, which
but
Hamilton?
Alexander Hamilton himself.
Oh, okay. Actual Hamilton. Yeah.
Who, when you go poking, I haven't read I don't have the Federalist Papers memorized or anything like that the way some people do, but they are a pretty profound group of writings. And if you ever have the chance, if people are interested, it's really worth reading because, having been someone who studied classical history in college, again, that was a long time ago and I'm not an expert, but the founding fathers, of course, studied what happens and tried to say, well, what if this happens? Well, we should stick this constitutional protection and stuff like this. So there a lot of thought went into it. And can I just read a couple sentences from
Please.
Alexander? Yeah. These are very apropos today. It will be equally forgotten that the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty, that in contemplation of a sound and well-formed judgment, their interests can never be separated, and that a dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the specious mask of zeal for the rights of the people than under the forbidden appearance of zeal for the firmness and efficiency of government. Now, what he's basically talking there is there's going to be these charlatans come around. Let's not forget that government is there for a reason and there to protect us. And so one of the reasons that we've seen these people undermining the rule of law and undermining the protections of government, stuff like this. And this is why they do it. He continues, history will teach us that the former has been found a much more certain road to the introduction of despotism meaning the attacks on government, than the latter, meaning just defending the right of government to enforce the laws. And that of those men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants.
It's good stuff.
Very apropos for today, don't you think?
Yes, I do think that.
I think that's the first Federalist paper, maybe the fourth.
Yeah.
What do you?
When you read writings from that era, especially from intelligent people like Hamilton, it's kind of like, I mean, you know how Americans all think that, I should ask you, Bill, you're American. Americans all think that when they hear an English accent, that means that person's smart. Like, like they could be listening to this absolute chav who's just some footy hooligan.
Yeah.
But
he makes a good point.
But they've got an English accent. Like, no, he's very well educated. I feel a bit like that when I read 18th century writings. Like just the way they speak, they just sound intelligent.
Yeah. And frankly, they were Englishmen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
maybe
not too far removed.
Yeah, maybe it's the English is the common denominator. But it's maybe they seem intelligent because of the way they write, but I find them very intelligent, I have to say. And actually that actually corresponds slightly with something I was thinking. I came up with my own theory, which I'm not going to put in as mellifluous vocabulary as Hamilton did, but I'll muddle it in my own bogan way. I got a theory of democracy, which let me run past you.
I'd love to hear it.
It's got nothing to do with gratitude, but my theory of democracy is because people get down about democracy. They get down about the fact that so many people who are voting are uninformed. They're like just knee-jerk partisans. They don't care about the actual issues or the policies. They're voting on how someone looks, whether they're taller. Just stupid stuff. The news coverage might be awful. Whatever. Like just all the things that people get angry about with democracy, right? And I was thinking to myself, I don't think the point of democracy, when you take a step back, is that the people are especially wise in how they choose their leaders. It's not about that at all. It's not about, I don't think the point of democracy is to choose the best leader. I think that, because I think it's a terrible system for choosing the best leader. Like there are 500 different data points and you get two choices, like for those 500 data points. And as I said before, most people are uninformed, not paying any attention, don't care, apathetic, whatever. That's not what the genius of democracy is, though. The genius of democracy is this, that that to get into a position where you could be a prime minister or a president, you usually have to tick a few boxes. Now, not always, but usually you have to tick a few boxes to get into that position. And and one of the boxes you need to tick is that you need to not be an absolute moron, usually. And if you become the leader, and you have ticked all the boxes that you need to become the leader in the first place, most decisions are pretty common sense on a day-to-day level. Once you're informed by your bureaucracy, your advisors, and you make the call, it's usually going to be, like most people will make the same decision in a lot of cases. There are obviously boundary cases, and that's where the arguments are about the taxes or whatever. But most of the decisions make themselves if you have the right advice and you apply yourself. I know they're hard decisions, but that the fact remains that it doesn't. In most cases, I think that's the real selection is getting to the point where you are one of the people who's up for election.
That's a good point.
But that's not what democracy is about. What democracy is about is stopping corruption, because it's just a fact that anyone who gets into a power, there's a reasonable chance they're going to get heirs. It's going to go to their head. They're going to become a bit arrogant, a bit entitled. They're going to start to lose empathy, because this is what happens to many, many people, if not all people. But the old power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And so what you need is you need to have a system where, number one, that person is turned over constantly, because even if the way the democracy works is, okay, you got your chance, the other guys are going to get their chance, and so forth. Just the fact there's the turning over and there's a guaranteed turning over process is important, because there's no other method of ruling where there's a guaranteed turnover like there is in democracy. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that there's always a gun to the head of the leader, knowing if I do something that blows up in a controversial way, I'm absolutely going to get voted out. Now, this is more an issue for an Australian or British style democracy in America, because where the president only gets 2 terms in America, so they're going anyway.
Yeah.
But in Britain or Australia, where they could potentially be prime minister for 20 years, they know it ends if there's a big controversy. And so there's an incentive for them to stop that happening. Right? And so that's what democracy is. Democracy is the loaded gun pointing at the head of the ruler.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now it's not gonna keep them totally in check, as we know, but it keeps them in check better than any other system of government that I know of, at least. That is what democracy is about. It's about turning over and keeping people accountable, and not about choosing the best person. And if you happen to choose the best person, even better. I mean, it gives you the opportunity to choose the best person, but that's not, we focus on that so much, the choice. And I think the choice is probably the third most important aspect of democracy. So that's my theory of democracy.
I like that. Yeah. And it's putting it's another way of saying that the voters have this power to, for corrective measures when they need to.
Yeah.
And the best person, what that does is that creates an incentive, at least in our 2-party system, for having a good candidate.
Yeah.
That's what you want. That's the incentive. Like, we need a good candidate, because otherwise we won't.
Absolutely. Even if people are constantly wrongfully terminated in terms of their time in office, that's okay. That's cool. It doesn't matter. Because it's much more important to turn them over than to risk keeping them in power a little bit too long.
Yeah, I agree.
So so it's anyways, that's my theory, and I'll try and resurrect Hamilton and get him to word it in a way that sounds a lot better to be impressive to people. What I'm grateful for is really, really obvious to anyone who's been in the comments in the last in the last 5 days. I'm grateful for your support, guys. I was feeling pretty low when I recorded the last 20 minutes of the last podcast. So thank you very much for your support. Let's move on. Like I've been saying, I just don't have the time to be doing the correspondences. Like, they actually take a while for me to go through all the comments and to weigh them up and stuff. It's a good 4 or 5 hours, and I'm just so far away from having that time right now. I will go back over stuff after the election is over. But right now, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. Let's get into the content. Bill, the first thing you wanted to talk about was, and I've got a lot to say about this as well, the non-endorsement from the Washington Post and the LA Times.
Oh, right. Isn't this super interesting?
I think it is.
It's so fascinating. Yeah. And of course, it's we've seen all these upheavals in the American media industry.
Yeah.
I think less so in Australia. I mean, what's been going on in America is very, very sad. A lot of these famous papers and chains are just getting eaten up and chewed up by hedge funds and malcontents and miscreants and a lot of right-wing people.
Well, every media outlet in Australia is owned by Rupert Murdoch, so they don't have that problem.
Right. No, exactly. It's different.
They've got a different problem. Yeah. Yeah. God.
And I don't know if you saw, for example, the Baltimore Sun, which was once a storied United States newspaper, has been taken over by all these crazy people. And now one of the people who run the Sinclair Media Group, they took over this, which is a famously right-wing TV station chain. And this has nothing to do with them being right wing, but just the forces and the economic forces. They've disbanded their entire feature section, which means no feature writers, no food writers, no arts writers, none of the fun stuff. Speaking as someone who's been an arts and features writer my whole life, that's a terrifying thing to hear. But it's just, people should first understand that the pressures these papers are under are just extraordinary and crushing. And it's not helped when they're taken over by hedge funds, which are actually trying to make more and more money, blah, blah, blah. But still, there are stark realities there. So anyway, there was this very, very rich doctor, and I'm going to get his name wrong. I'll look it up while we're talking. Took over the LA Times 4 or 5 years.
Patrick Soon-Shiong.
Soon-Shiong, right? I knew it was something like that, but I didn't want to mess it up. And then, and of course, Jeff Bezos, around what I guess has been close to 8 or 12 years ago now, bought the Washington Post,
Yes.
Which of course is another storied American newspaper. And it was part of the Newsweek group. And I think the guy from Berkshire, Warren Buffett, owned it for a while. He was a major investor back in Katharine Graham. And there's a whole history of that, which we won't go into. Anyway, Jeff Bezos owned it, and Soon Shung in LA. And this is great because they're billionaires and they can prop up these newspapers and, in theory, bring some new business minds into it and make them solve it. It doesn't always go well. Owning a newspaper is really great in certain ways. It's not in other ways. And what happened in LA is that the editorial board had decided, of course, as any sane person would, to endorse Kamala Harris and not Trump. And he put the kibosh in that in LA. And then the same thing happened in Washington. Now, the one in LA has caused a lot of discomfort and discomforting thing in the journalistic community there. People should understand that Los Angeles Times used to be one of the most profitable companies of any sort in the world. 20 or 30 years ago, the Los Angeles Times, I forget how much it weighed, but it would be hundreds of pages every day, just a dozen sections. It would just be, and the fact that they printed this every day and delivered it all over Los Angeles was an extraordinary thing. And of course, the Washington Post was one of the most fabulously successful papers in America for a long time, had extraordinary penetration in the Beltway area. And of course, it's the home of Washington. So anyway, Jeff Bezos, it's unclear a little bit whether it's Bezos or the publisher. We've been getting a lot of conflicting information. But anyway, they put the kibosh in endorsements and are saying the paper will no longer make a presidential endorsement.
So let me just say something. First of all, about the LA Times, what Soon Shung did was he offered the LA Times editorial board. He found out they were in the process of writing their, quote, case against Trump. And he offered them, instead of doing that, he offered them the opportunity, quote, to draft a factual analysis of all the positive and negative policies by each candidate during their tenures at the White House and how these policies affected the nation. And they chose not to take that option. So that's what he did. As for whether it was Bezos or not, I actually, the publisher, Will Lewis, this British dude they pulled in from Fleet Street, he was creating a bit of squid ink about whether it was Bezos or not. Like, he was being very evasive in what he wrote and what he said. But Bezos has then written, and I'm at one point in time during this discussion, I'm going to read a lot from Bezos's op-ed.
Oh, yeah,
because it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, that op-ed is as good as a confession from Bezos. It's me.
Yeah.
Like, he wouldn't have written that op-ed if it wasn't him.
Right.
So it's definitely Bezos, I think, who's behind it. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, and I was going to get to that. And then, so then there was this huge outcry about this decision. One by one, members of the Washington Post editorial board and some other ancillary opinion columnists started resigning from the paper. Now, people should understand that in most American newspapers, there's this what do you call it? It's like a construct that there is an editorial side, which is all the reporters and stuff who do the reporting, and then there's an opinion section. And in most papers, the opinion section doesn't answer to the editor of the paper. The opinion section answers to the publisher. That's the way it's done at the New York Times and the Washington Post. And the idea is, hey, we're all the reporters over there. It's the publisher's paper. He's allowed to print opinion. Now, of course, do people understand this? And I think a lot of sophisticated people in America do. And just as with, for example, the Wall Street Journal, which obviously does a lot of hard-hitting reporting and has an absolutely insane opinion section, people understand that. So a lot of the discussion about, we'll get actually some of the argument that he makes are pretty specious. But anyway, there's supposed to be this separation, and the people who've been resigning aren't technically Washington Post reporters. They're members of this opinion board who answer to the publisher, not the editor. Okay,
Gotcha.
So there is this thing. And traditionally in papers that I've worked for, Chicago Tribune and stuff like that, the opinion section is actually in a different part of the building. They don't actually mix that much. So obviously some of the, everyone knows who Maureen Dowd is at the New York Times when she walks through the building. But technically she probably... I can't remember now, but I think they all work on a different floor. Okay. So anyway, so this has turned into a huge thing. Now, it's really funny. There's just one point I want to make about this. So it's really funny because it's turned into a huge disaster. There's all these different reports, but it seems like hundreds of thousands of people are canceling their Post subscriptions, which is a huge thing. This is according to David Folkenflik at NPR. Newspaper subscriptions cost a lot, $100, $200 a year these days, depending on how you subscribe. That's a lot of money to the Post. It's really hurt its reputation. Another thing people might not quite appreciate is that even though the Washington Post is a famous paper and stuff like this, it's a newspaper in a metropolitan area. That's just what it is. It's just like any other paper in that way. But of course, its metropolitan area is a very, very special one, because of course you have all the main governmental workers. So the people who read the Washington Post, the Supreme Court justices, everyone at the Defense Department, everyone at the Commerce Department, et cetera, and of course all those collar counties around Washington in Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland. These are among the richest counties in the United States. So we're talking about extraordinarily powerful money group, and they're really mad about this because, of course, DC is of course a very a Democratic-leaning area in any case. But of course, when you're talking about government workers and the sort of disruption that was seen during the Trump administration that seems to be coming in the next Trump administration, these are people who are not happy about it. So it's very funny that this turned into a big, you have the Streisand effect. Yep. That, of course, they tried not to do an endorsement. Of course, it's really hurt their reputation. It's going to hurt them business-wise. And, of course, there's been all these conspiracy theories. Yes. Now, the main one is that these members of Jeff Bezos' space company were meeting with Trump. And so actually, one of the Washington Post columnists who quit said specifically, Trump was supposed to meet with these people, and he didn't meet with them until they announced they weren't doing the endorsement, and then they decided to meet with them. So that's one conspiracy theory. The one point I want to make about this is newspaper endorsements don't matter.
Yeah, they really don't.
And that there's a flaw in this argument that if Jeff Bezos really wanted to do something to help Trump out with the Washington Post, he would put the screws to the investigative unit. He'd put the screws to the political side. Say, you know what? He'd tell his publisher, look, I want you to cut back the funding for those bozos by 40%, and start getting rid of the good people, bring in some bozos. And so people won't really notice. So that's one thing. Now, what I think is kind of funny about this, though, is that, and of course, there's a crazy history in America with newspaper endorsements. I mean, back in 1948, every newspaper in America endorsed Thomas Dewey over Harry Truman. This is the famous one where Truman didn't accidentally, but he barely won in the last minute. Every paper in America supported Nixon in 1960, supported Nixon in 72, supported Reagan in 80 and 84. So they lean conservative. But on the other hand, newspaper endorsements don't really matter in the normal course of things because it's sort of baked into your culture. They matter when it's sort of a man bites dog rather than dog bites man. Like the LA Times is traditionally a very conservative paper, always going to endorse Republican candidates until the last 20 years or something like that. So it doesn't really matter. But now here's my theory is that Jeff Bezos doesn't really realize it doesn't matter. And Trump doesn't realize it doesn't matter. And the Trump people weren't smart enough to say, look, we want you to get rid of those political reporters. They said, we don't want you to endorse Kamala Harris. And then Bezos goes, well, we won't then, as if that's like some big crushing thing. So I could see both of them being dumb enough to think that is actually something to cut a deal about when in fact no one knows. And Bezos actually not appreciating how ridiculous it was. And I'll finish up. I have Bezos's thing we can talk about in a second. But the last thing we should realize, though, is it shouldn't be left sight of is that this is a terrible, terrible, immoral, bad decision. That this is obviously a case where there are bigger things at stake. And by not having an endorsement, you're basically saying, it can go either way and we're okay with it. And obviously that's not a tenable thing for intelligent people. And that's why there's so much outcry about it. Okay. That's my position.
Okay. Now I'll say a few things and then let's tic-tac-toe about it. Okay. First of all, we should say that the tradition of endorsements in the LA Times goes back all the way to 2008. So it's not exactly a tradition that's been going for a huge amount of time. In Washington Post has been on and off. They last had a gap in 1984. But since 1988 they've had endorsements. There was a period there for 50 years or so where they didn't have endorsements, and they did, and then sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it's been on and off with the Washington Post. A couple of important things to note. With the Washington Post, the first thing is that you're about to hear some excuses from Jeff Bezos. And something you need to bear in mind is that the editors endorsed Angela Olso-Brooks for the US Senate and Eugene Vindman for the US House earlier this month. In fact, the Vindman endorsement was on October 13, like less than 2 weeks before Bezos said, we're not doing endorsements. So that is highly suspicious.
Right.
Right. So that's unless their policy only extends to presidents and there's no, and you can endorse whenever you like, which no one's said that. That makes it highly suspicious, the fact that they're so inconsistent with decisions made only 2 weeks ago. Let me read one part of what Jeff Bezos wrote.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah.
In the annual public surveys about trust and reputation, journalists and the media have regularly fallen near the very bottom, often just above Congress. But in this year's Gallup poll, we managed to fall below Congress. Our profession is now the least trusted of all. Something we are doing is clearly not working. We must be accurate. We must be believed to be accurate. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but we're failing on the second requirement. That's believing to be accurate. Most people believe the media is biased. Anyone who doesn't see this is paying scant attention to reality, and those who fight reality lose. Reality is an undefeated champion. It would be easy to blame others for our long and continuing fall in credibility and therefore declining impact, but the victim mentality will not help. Complaining is not a strategy. We must work harder to control what we can control to increase our credibility. Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, I'm going with newspaper A's endorsement. None. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. Eugene Meier, publisher of the Washington Post from 1933 to 1946, thought the same, and he was right. By itself, declining to endorse presidential candidates is not enough to move us very far up the trust scale, but it's a meaningful step in the right direction. I wish we had made the change earlier than we did, in a moment further from the election and the emotions around it. That was inadequate planning and not some intentional strategy. Okay, so what he just said in that little bit there, I actually agree with most of that. I think most of that's true. I think that, like you said, endorsements don't matter. I do think that you seem more independent if you don't give an endorsement. I agree with that. I agree with him. They should have made this decision 2 years ago or 4 years ago, even better. Yeah. If they weren't bending to Trump, they shouldn't have made it 2 weeks after they'd made another endorsement. They should have said a year ago or 2 years ago, we are not endorsing anyone from now on. And no one would have complained, I think, if they'd done that then. Maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me if you think they would have complained. But in my view, if they said right now, okay, it's too late, but we want to have a policy of no endorsements. So this endorsement, this election will be our final endorsement. If they'd said that, I reckon people would have rolled with it. Because we don't know who the competitors are in 4 years' time.
Right.
It's only when you know who the competitors are that you have concerns about whether there's a ulterior motive. And so I think I agree with Jeff Bezos that it would have been good for them to do it earlier, but for exactly that reason, I think they should have had their endorsement and they should have started the policy as of the next election. That's what I would have done. And I would have no problem with it if they had done that. What do you think about what I just read from Jeff Bezos?
Okay, so two things. Yeah. One, the argument, there's a really interesting argument here because the argument that if you wanted to take that, I just grew up in this world, right? Mm. So I don't have an issue with newspapers giving endorsements because on the one hand, you can also make the argument that, hey, at least we know where they're coming from.
Yep.
You know, that's like a good thing. The Wall Street Journal, we know that deep down inside, there's a very dark heart beating in the Wall Street Journal that we can see on the editorial page, even if it doesn't always, and it sometimes does come through in the news pages. But I think the argument should be that, hey, we have too much effect in these local races. I mean, if the Washington Post endorses in a school board race or a local representative or something like that, then that's definitive. It's just like the way the New York Times' Broadway reporter, could open and close a play. And that's, I think, a real strong argument not to do that because it's just giving way too much power, and you can say, hey, we're just doing the reviews, that's what we do, we can't pay attention. But you could make that argument, and I think alternately you would say, look, we really don't have that much effect on the presidential race, but we think we should comment on this. So I actually think I would turn it the other way. They shouldn't be endorsing in local races if you want to make that, but in the national, who cares? The main issue I have with this is this puerile thing he starts with about how nobody trusts the media anymore. Okay. And that's just completely a sophistic argument. And the reason is that, first of all, everyone always complains about the media. Okay. I've been doing it my whole life. I've written about and I've been a media critic. I was always the guy in the alternative paper making fun of the local daily, catching mistakes, ridiculing the rock critic, catching the editorial page and hypocrisy and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a fine American tradition. And the thing is, it's really hard, but people have to say it today, that the thing is, the media is more reliable today than it ever has been. Okay, particularly you have New York Times, you have Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, you have more access to good reporting, CNN, than ever in the history of the world. Okay, so the whole idea that the media is bad today is not true, and more people have access to the news than ever before. That's all a good thing. The thing that's specious about it is that by far the biggest problem in the media is, of course, on the right. Starting with Fox News, the Sinclair Broadcasting, which has 200 or more local news stations, which are very influential. A lot of these crappy little newspaper chains that are spewing out this right-wing stuff. Also the right-wing radio networks. I mean, the amount of unethical behavior, lying, disinformation, and just sheer partisanship and nastiness is just incredible. So what happened, and what do they all say? They say, oh, the mainstream media is bad. They're the ones saying, oh, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they're so liberal, they're so this and that, which frankly isn't even true. We can parse that a little bit because, of course, a lot of the reporters, right? Obviously, most reporters who work at these places are Democrats. That's an entirely different issue. But what you have is on the right, you have this poisonous news coverage saying that actual mainstream coverage is bad. And so that infects those people. So that's 35% of the people. And then you have the rest of us who say, yeah, a lot of the news industry is bad. Look at Fox, look at Sinclair, look at Sky News, look at the News Corporation papers, the stuff they do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, Fox News, as we know, had an $800 million defamation settlement it just dealt with. And would people forget this, committing defamation on a scale that has literally never been seen by orders of magnitude in any libel case in the history of American jurisprudence, right? So that's why I think this is when you have one side of the media that's so bad, poisoning their side against the mainstream media, and then people in the mainstream saying, yeah, there's a lot of really bad stuff. And my typical carping of the newspapers and publications that I read every day, just because I complain about them, because that's what I do, because I sit around and gripe about Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, and stuff like that, and all the sort of day-to-day peccadillos. You throw all those together, and you get like 80% of the country. But I think, most people, if they don't like the Washington Post, they wouldn't subscribe to it. Like, traditionally, Washington Post has done a great job, and obviously they've invested a lot of money in good reporting. So my issue with him is that first thing about, people don't trust the media, so we're going to take a duck on this very consequential election is just ridiculous. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I was going to say a couple of things. I'll say a couple of things in response to that, and then I'll move on to the next bit of this story.
Okay.
I think polling suggests that fewer people trust the mainstream media now than in the past. I think like the polling is like 15% trust. It's really low.
Right. They say that. Right. But you and I have issues with the New York Times. I can just I can give you 30 minutes on what's wrong with the New York Times right now. Okay? I've literally written, I don't know if I've ever talked about my BuzzFeed story talking about the New York Times covered R. Kelly during the 2000s, which got me in an enormous amount of trouble. I'm there. Okay. I have all these issues on, believe me. But, most sane people would say the New York Times does a very, very good job. And when they screw up, they admit it. Okay. And then the other 50% who are coming from the right, they don't read the New York Times, or they do, or they're lying, or they're dumb. And I'm sorry, those opinions don't count because they're just wrong.
It's more than the right.
And they're motivated by animus and not intellectual honesty.
Look,
I would say
that's fair enough. I'm not going to argue about this on a partisan basis, but it's more than the right. Like when you're polling as low as these people poll, I understand what you're saying, that people on the left who would criticize it, but not with the same negativity that the people on the right are criticizing it, and they're all put in the same basket.
They want it to be better.
Of saying don't trust, but it is different kind of distrust. I get what you're saying, but even when like all those situations have existed for 20 years, at least 20 years, and like the polling has dropped dramatically in the last 10 years, dramatically. And partisanship was around long before then. And so I think something is going on. I don't know the answer. But what I was just going to say was that, to your point, as someone who is often extremely critical of newspapers, but I like to think of myself as, I try to be fair, I think that people, and I think that fair-minded people on the right would agree with this, that most of the time when I see a media criticism from the right about something in a mainstream newspaper, most of the time I agree with them. I think, yeah, you've scored a point there. Like that thing you just pointed out, yeah, that's bad. But what I think people don't acknowledge, and they should acknowledge, is that there are at worst 4 or 5 articles of dubious quality per day. And there are 200 that are of no dubious, that there's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. Those are good numbers. Even in the worst case scenario where you acknowledge every single criticism, that you're still batting at 90% or 95%.
Yeah.
And that's important because when that goes away, that 95% goes away, we're in trouble. Like even if you take away all the controversial bits, like if you ignore, like if you just grant all the controversial bits just disappeared, the other bits are really important and they get taken for granted all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real problem. And I was also say, as someone who's extremely critical about the media, the things which I think they're most worthy of criticism for have nothing to do with partisan bias at all.
Yeah.
They're to do with being misinformed. They're to do with sensationalism. They're to do with the social group the social group that the writer is from. They're to do with a whole bunch of different things which have nothing to do with partisanship. And we just flatten out a 3D image to be just about left and right, which I think does disservice to the problems which need to be solved as well.
Yeah,
I would say. Anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. And again, I think we're saying the same thing, that there's an intellectual honesty that basically goes on, that permeates the mainstream media in America. I mean, it just permeates it, that you really are allowed to say, sometimes you have these superstars, but you're allowed to go up to people and say, I think that was wrong. I don't think that's great. You have these editorial meetings, and often people say very controversial things. Sometimes you get in trouble. And there's this culture of correcting. It's bad when you make a mistake. And it's even worse if you make a mistake and don't acknowledge it. I mean, there's just all these things people don't realize that goes on every single day. Yeah. And then but on the right, you just have this, it's just like what happens a lot here, the way News Corporation and Sky attacks the ABC. They're just, they find some little thing and they'll run like 30 stories about it and blow it all out of proportion, spread it over all the tabloids and the front pages, and some little thing. And meanwhile, the ABC has Media Watch to spank it. You know? So the ABC makes a mistake, gets spanked in-house by its own people, but some other little thing, that the difference in attacks and stuff like that and intellectual honesty is just stark.
And to be fair to publications like New York Times and Washington Post and so forth, look, I am someone who reads a lot of the media from all sides. And on their worst day, the New York Times has higher standards than the best of the blogs that criticize the New York Times. I assure you of that. And it's something I don't want to waste time on this podcast just spanking some blogger, or the Daily Wire or something like that. But but just honestly, the difference in the standards is significant. And I say that as someone who has a real chip on my shoulder about newspapers. I really do. I grew up with this massive class issues. I was from a a lower class family. I went to a very upper class school, a huge chip on my shoulder. I saw the Sydney Morning Herald as the enemy, essentially.
Oh, that's great.
Like that was my attitude. And so I've all got all kinds of psychologies about this, but you just have to admit there is a big gap in the standards between the criticized and the criticizers.
Yeah.
There really is.
Oh.
But we should go on. Sorry, yes?
Just one really quick. The other thing people should realize is that because of all these attacks, they've had a lot of effects. And that's another thing, because then people like us, another thing we attack a place like the New York Times for is that they have these conservative columnists, Russ Douthat and what's his face? Who's the other conservative columnist?
David French?
No, not David French. David.
He's conservative.
No, but forgive me, the one on the PBS NewsHour, the one who got in trouble for
David Brooks.
David Brooks, right?
Okay, yeah.
And they are allowed to say the most incredibly ridiculous things, and they're just sort of given a pass.
Well, that's an opinion. There's ridiculous things on the left.
But there's a level of things they say that people on the left would never get away with, and they're allowed to because they're Republicans. And so just the hypocrisies involved and other things like that.
There's some pretty poor left-wing opinion writing. But let's just let's move on to what this actual story is about.
Okay, yeah.
Which is like the actual commercial interests, which what the real problem is here. The real concern is that if we cut through the crap, is that people are concerned now that Trump's about to win this election. I think most people are starting to think that's the case, although you're about to argue against it. I know, Bill. And people are concerned that he is becoming increasingly authoritarian as time is going on. And the question is he going to face any resistance? Because people are concerned he's going to staff himself with a whole bunch of yes men, which was not the case in the first term. And they're concerned that people like the Washington Post should be providing the resistance. And we're already seeing an epidemic of gutlessness already in the face of Trump, and he hasn't even won an election yet. You've got Mitt Romney is conspicuously not endorsing Harris. He's conspicuously keeping mum. This is after he's openly said he's worries about the security expenses from when he criticizes Trump. Jamie Dimon, amazingly, is refusing to endorse Harris, even though he is quietly hinting he'd like to be her Treasury Secretary, which is amazing gutlessness. It's actually pitching for a position in her cabinet while not endorsing her. John Kelly blew up the whole of last week and still hasn't endorsed Harris. Warren Buffett is tiptoeing around Trump at the moment as well. Bill Gates super quietly donated $50 million to Harris. Mind you, none of these endorsements matter, but it's just what they're indicative of. That's the issue. They're indicative of people not wanting to upset Donald Trump. And if the richest, most powerful people in the world are already tiptoeing around the guy before he's even elected, it's a scary sign for the rest of America as far as putting up resistance if Donald Trump goes into full authoritarian mode.
That's very well put.
That's what people are scared about.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them angry. And especially Jeff Bezos, who is the second richest person on earth. If anyone should stand up to Donald Trump, it's him. So what's going on then with Jeff Bezos? This is the concern. The concern is that it's not about the Washington Post. It's about Amazon. Most of Bezos's wealth comes with his 9% stake in Amazon. And in 2021, they do a lot of business with the government. In 2021, Amazon was awarded a $10 billion cloud computing contract with the NSA. In 2022, they got a piece of a $9 billion cloud computing contract with the Department of Defense. They got another multi-billion dollar deal in cloud computing with the CIA. Also in 2023, the Federal Trade Commission started suing Amazon for being a monopoly, and that lawsuit's still going, and they want that lawsuit dropped. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos also owns Blue Origin, the space exploration company that's a competitor to Elon Musk's SpaceX. In May 2023, Blue Origin was awarded a $3.4 billion contract to build a lunar lander for NASA. Between 2025 and 2029, they're expected to compete for $5.6 billion in space launch contracts for the Pentagon. All of that is worth a lot more than the $250 million Bezos spent for the Washington Post. So that is what the concern is. And by the way, Bezos has reason to believe that Trump would retaliate. Recall he spent his entire first term calling the Washington Post the Amazon Washington Post.
Right.
And Amazon already sued the federal government in 2019 for awarding a $10 billion cloud computing contract to Microsoft instead of Amazon in retaliation for Trump hating the Washington Post coverage. So that's the background. And then you've already mentioned the meeting with the Blue Origin CEO, David Limp, with Trump directly after, hours after the non-endorsement happened. So it was very suspiciously timed. Okay, so that is what this is all about. And Jeff Bezos addressed that as well in his op-ed. So I'll read out what he said, and then you can discuss your thoughts on this bill. Bezos said, "I would also like to be clear that no quid pro quo of any kind is at work here. Neither campaign nor candidate was consulted or informed at any level or in any way about this decision. It was made entirely internally. Dave Limp, the chief executive of one of my companies, Blue Origin, met with former President Donald Trump on the day of our announcement. I sighed when I found out because I knew it would provide ammunition to those who would like to frame this as anything other than a principled decision. But the fact is, I didn't know about that meeting beforehand. Even Limp didn't know about it in advance. The meeting was scheduled quickly that morning," which is what they were saying. That's the conspiracy theory. Anyway, there is no connection between it and our decision on presidential endorsements, and any suggestion otherwise is false. When it comes to the appearance of conflict, I am not an ideal owner of the Post. Every day, somewhere, some Amazon executive or Blue Origin executive or someone from the other philanthropies and companies I own or invest in is meeting with government officials. I once wrote that the Post is a complexifier for me. It is. But it turns out I'm also a complexifier for the Post. You can see my wealth and business interests as a bulwark against intimidation, or you can see them as a web of conflicting interests. Only my own principles can tip the balance from one to the other. I assure you that my views here are in fact principled, and I believe my track record as owner of the Post since 2013 backs this up. You're, of course, free to make your own determination, but I challenge you to find one instance in those 11 years where I've prevailed upon anyone at the Post in favour of my own interests. It hasn't happened. Go for it.
I have an example
Yes.
just now when you didn't let the Post endorse for president.
There you go.
Because the Post, of course, endorsed against him in 2016 and endorsed against him in 2020.
Yep.
So that's the example. You know, I mean, this is another, it's a very interesting piece of rhetorical bullshit, his whole thing, because I can believe him when he said I didn't know about the meeting. But this is what I was getting at my original Jeremiah about this, is that it's just, and it's, I don't even know what the word, immoral isn't even the word, but just to take a pass at this moment to say that here's someone we didn't like 8 years ago, didn't like 4 years ago, and then stood by while the Capitol was attacked, and then has been convicted of all these felonies and is on the dock for a lot more and has obviously done a lot worse, that, oh, I can't take a position on this. I mean, it's just this, it's just such an extraordinary, morally cowardly stand that to me, it doesn't even matter if he has a bad reason for it, if it's just he's a bad person. It's just a wrong thing to do. And so he deserves everything he's getting.
Can I take a controversial opinion on this?
Sure.
I believe him. I believe him. I'll tell you why I believe him. Because I don't think he's an idiot. And if he's and he would have to be an idiot to think that this would work. Like if he is genuinely not endorsing Trump because he thinks it will help his businesses, then he is an absolute moron. Because we all know, anyone who spent more than 1 second watching Trump knows you're as good as your last 5 seconds with that guy.
Yeah.
Like whatever decision he makes now, the very first article that the Washington Post publishes that's anti-Trump, it's over.
Yeah.
Like that's it. He's in the doghouse again. So I don't think Jeff Bezos is such a moron that he wouldn't realize that. So for that reason, I think it makes no logical sense for him to think that he's actually buying anything, no matter what deal. Even if they made a signed contract deal that he was going to get billions of dollars worth of cloud computer contracting as a result of this, Trump wouldn't honor the deal. There is absolutely no way that they're going to get a brass razoo out of Trump. I mean, God, Elon Musk is the guy who's making the decisions on the spending.
Yeah.
Like his competitor. Jeff Bezos' arch competitor. Do you think he really expects Blue Origin to get 1 cent out of the government while Elon Musk is making the calls? Yeah. Like, I just don't think he's that dumb. And so for that reason, I believe him, because I just think the alternative is that he's a complete idiot.
Yeah, I agree. Some of it does ring true, but it's still, it's an odd, I don't know if he's been living in such a bubble or I don't know what it is, but it's very dispiriting.
I still think he should have done what I said. He should have said,
2 years ago he could have done that.
Yeah, or he should have said to them, to make your endorsement, this is the last endorsement the Washington Post is ever going to make.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing I should have said at the beginning, he owns the paper. It's his right to do anything.
Yeah, sure.
I don't like these people when they say, it's wrong. He can do whatever. But obviously the way it was done and the circumstances that it's happening now are very, very troubling. Okay. So he just deserves everything he gets.
Okay, I got one more question for you then. What should everyone else do? All right, we've talked about what he should do.
It's really complicated because you don't want to, a lot of people are canceling their subscriptions. Yeah. That, of course, hurts this paper, which is in a lot of financial trouble. They've been really screwing up. And the paper, it's so funny because they have such a crazy history. It used to make so much money. It got hit by the internet like everything else. I don't know if you know this, but they originally started, they invest a lot of money in the internet, like a lot of money. And they invested too much money in it. And what they ended up doing is building a new newsroom in Virginia because that's a non-union state. Okay. So imagine if you have this newspaper and then you have this thing called the internet. It's like, oh yeah. And it's in another state. Yeah. Okay. And so this whole thing of like, everything now is like you write obviously direct for the web and then stick it in the paper the next day. None of that. It was all, there's all that in the newsroom hated the internet and vice versa. And they spent and wasted a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. And it's very difficult. But the Post apparently has been losing a lot of its online readership. And it's a very, and you can't really hold this against anyone because it's obviously a very, very difficult time for all these places. So I don't hold that against him. But a lot of people are canceling the subscriptions. They're saying all you're doing is hurting the reporters, which is true. Yeah. Ideally, the best thing is to cancel your Prime membership because that's the thing that gets him.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because it's, look, it's not like Jeff Bezos can't take the hit. If the Washington Post makes a huge loss, it's still just a hobby for him.
Right.
So yes, theoretically, it hurts the newspaper to cancel the subscriptions, and the newspapers the media in general is in a bit of a death spiral at the moment. So trying to hurt one of the very few effective newspapers at this point in time seems quite self-destructive and self-defeating. But Bezos can take the hit. But I would personally just cancel Prime if you want to make a stand.
Exactly.
And what about the journalists? Should the journalists be resigning? Because in particular, there's a bit of pressure on Jennifer Rubin. Because Jennifer Rubin, she's the Washington Post conservative, well, inverted commas, conservative columnist. She became not very conservative a long time ago.
Yeah, she's a never Trump prominent, former Republican conservative columnist who is now never Trump.
Yeah, and she very much has the zeal of the converted.
Yeah.
She would not be out of place on MSNBC at the moment. But she wrote in response to one of the LA Times' staff resigning, "Brava. That is courage, and shame on her boss for not joining her." And then in response to another one who resigned, "Bravo, all respect, and where are the rest of them?"
And now she's under. I did not read that.
And that was literally, that was poor timing from her because the rumors had already started that Jeff Bezos was interfering with the endorsement even before she wrote that. But that was literally the day before the announcement came out.
Yeah.
So a lot of the conservatives are currently trolling her. They're in her Twitter mentions going, "Oh, you going to resign? You going to resign? Shouldn't you be resigning by now?" So let's leave aside the trolling aspect of it. It is funny, but let's just leave that aside. Should people be resigning in response?
Well, I certainly respect it. As someone, I can't say that I've ever resigned, but I have been fired under similar circumstances on matters of principle a couple times. So I can kind of say, I have a little bit of credibility in saying, sometimes you just need to stand up. I don't quite understand the opinion world there. Obviously, I respect the people who do, just because, and again, it's disturbing if you do see this as an election as a somewhat existential threat to America. This is a really, really bad decision. It's worth taking a stand on. So I respect the people who resign, but I'm not going to get my high horse about people who don't.
Yeah, I respect anyone who makes a tough decision that has a negative impact on their life for principled reasons.
Yeah.
But to be honest, the mindset of resignation on this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know what it's achieving by taking yourself out of the game. I think if you want to take a stand, what you do is you write an article. For a start, you submit it to the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And if they won't publish it, then you make sure it's published somewhere else. That's extremely critical and says exactly what you think. And you can make them fire you. That's fine. If they want to fire you, well, great, no problems. But I think taking yourself out of the picture rather than criticizing them, I think is in the most effective possible way. I think it's a mistake. Like from a tactical point of view, I think that it's a mistake. I'm not talking about from a selfish point of view. I think that you should be the pebble in their shoe. That's what you should be. And when you resign, you're jumping out of the shoe. Like you're not being a pain to, you're being a pain to them for 1 microsecond that they ignore you, and then you're gone. Yeah. Whereas if you stay there whinging and carping and complaining, then you're much more of a nuisance, and you'll have much more impact. And then if they want to sack you, well, then you're a hero. Yeah, like so that is that's what I would do. But yeah, it is. I do acknowledge that it is funny on Twitter watching people harassing Jen Rubin.
I believe that too.
Sadly, this is the only model of journalism that works these days. Having a beneficent dictator who owns a publication. Like having someone with hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars who doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, on the local level. Yeah.
Like there's just like the Atlantic, Lauren Powell Jones. Jobs. There are all kinds of problems with having a rich owner, but the other problems you have from not having a rich owner are greater.
Yeah, you have an owner who isn't rich.
Yeah, and that's a problem because the influence on you as a writer is greater then.
Yeah,
and the issues of like you say with hedge funds and the other ownership models are worse. Like unfortunately, it's like this is like the government funding model. I don't think is any better either. I mean. Look, I don't feel any pressure at all to I don't even know what the government would think of what I have to say. It doesn't even occur to me. But I don't feel any pressure. But honestly, I think that if you were a prominent person on 7:30 Report reporting on the government, you would feel pressure. And I don't have the inside word there. But you would feel more pressure than you would feel if you were working for Jeff Bezos, I think, and or Lauren Powell Jobs. Like I think this is actually. I hope one day we come up with a better model. But right now, I think while it sucks, it's the best model that exists in a dying industry right now. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I basically do. Yeah. There's no good answer right now. Yeah. There isn't.
Okay. Let's try something else. Why don't we just do a couple of Bill things in a row, shall we? Let's just make sure we get some Bill done. Oh. And then we can do a bit of my stuff.
What do you want to talk about MSG?
Let's try Madison Square Garden.
We don't have to go into too much depth on it.
That's
but
okay.
I'm sure people have heard about this. Trump, of course, is from New York City, Madison Square Garden. I think this is overblown, but it's obviously a famous arena in Manhattan. Trump is obviously someone who has been basically blown out of New York along with his daughter and his son-in-law and everything else. And so this is one of his weird little things like, I want to have a rally in Madison Square Garden. To his credit, it was full. And apparently there was huge lines outside. People couldn't get in.
Yeah.
People waited in line for hours and hours. And it was apparently not very pretty with a lot of leftover bottles of urine on the sidewalk and things like that. And then I guess inside it went on for 6 hours. Now, what's interesting about it, you've probably heard that there was this one comedian who specifically made this one crack, okay? And the crack was something like,
my mom's a boomer in the state of Ohio, and there's no convincing her of anything. She's eating the cats. She's eating the dogs. They're eating the pets up there. It is absolutely wild times. It really, really is. And, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right. Okay. We're getting there. Again, normally I don't follow the national anthem, everybody. This isn't exactly a perfect comedy setup.
Now, a lot of other things went on, but that particular remark went viral. Okay, I'm going to get back to that in a second. But people should know that the other thing about it is that up until Trump, it really was a remarkable band of really, really creepy people. And I think it's kind of odd that Walz and Harris stopped the whole thing about them being weird, because this was a very, very weird event. And you had a lot of people just saying really, really, really nasty things. Just this almost unrelenting spew of hatefulness. They made some remark about Kamala Harris having a pimp. There was some even talk that there was one comedian, I don't know if it was the lead guy, who was going to use the C word. And I guess they cut that one.
That's Tony Hinchcliffe. They didn't cut it. They vetoed that.
Yeah, they vetoed that joke. One guy said the whole party is a bunch of degenerates, Jew haters and lowlifes, every once of them. She was called a fake. Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country. Of course, you had our buddy Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
And he said something really amazing. It's going to be pretty hard to look at us and say, you know what, Kamala Harris, she got 85 million votes because she's so impressive as the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president.
Let's watch that.
And the second reason that people love Trump, and I put myself in this category, it's why I'm here today, is because he's liberated us in the deepest and truest sense. And the liberation he has brought to us is the liberation from the obligation to tell lies. Donald Trump has made it possible for the rest of us to tell the truth about the world around us. And that's the single most liberating thing you can do for people. If you want to enslave people, if you want to degrade them, force them to tell lies. And they have. They forced us to lie about everything at gunpoint, effectively. They put people in prison for refusing to lie. And not just the obvious lies that men can become women or Vladimir Putin blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. No, honestly, he did. January 6th was an insurrection. They were unarmed, but it was very insurrection-y. Not even the obvious ones, but the big lie. You know what the big lie is? The big lie is that they're impressive. That's what the big lie is. That the people in charge have somehow earned the right to rule over you, and they haven't. And you know that. These are the single most useless people in the United States. And Donald Trump has empowered the rest of us through mostly just sticking around in the face of their hate and abuse and persecution. He has given the rest of us the right to call BS on the charade. No, you are not better than us. No, you are not smarter than us. No, you do not deserve what you have. You probably stole it. No, you're not going to bully me into silence anymore. And I can promise you at this point, 9 days out, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard and pretty much every high school senior and college shorty girl in the country has come out finally say, yeah, I am for Donald Trump, actually. When the entire country has realized there is nothing embarrassing about this, what's embarrassing is to take a perfectly great country and destroy it, as they have. I'm not ashamed. You should be. At that moment, it's going to be pretty tough for them 10 days from now to look in the eye to America with a straight face. It's going to be pretty hard to look at us and say, you know what? Kamala Harris, she got 85 million votes because she's just so impressive. As the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president, it was just a groundswell of popular support. And anyone who thinks otherwise is just a freak or a criminal. At this stage of the game, after 9 years of listening to their lies and finding every single one of them totally false, no, it's not safe and effective, and no, she's not impressive. It's very hard for me to believe the rest of us are going to say, you know what, Joe Scarborough, you're right. You're right. She won fair and square because she's just so impressive. I don't think so. And to me, that is liberation. It's the freedom to say what's obviously true as a free man and not a slave. And I just want to say thank you, Donald Trump, for that.
We find ourselves saying this a lot. Even by Trump standards, this was a low point, okay? Even by the standards of the Republican Party, the vitriol and the language on this, I find really extraordinary. The guy who Go ahead.
No, yeah, just before you go on, I just want to just make the point before we leave Tucker Carlson behind, because I'm not going to be talking about him again, and I suspect you won't either. That the thing that bothered me about
Ooh,
that,
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
okay, the thing that bothered me about that Tucker Carlson bit was not all the weird misracialing, like the Samoan thing and all that kind of stuff, and not his creepy laugh. The thing that bothers me about that is the meta narrative of that section is him saying, if Donald Trump loses, we're not accepting it. He might as well have said the election doesn't count. We are not accepting the result. Doesn't matter if we found any evidence of voter fraud or any shenanigans. It simply defies credibility that this is a 2-horse race. That's what that section was about.
Yeah, and specifically, what I thought you were going to zero on is that margin of 85 million votes, because she conceivably could get 85 million.
She totally could.
So, everyone understands that could happen, and he's like specifically talking about that, like it can't happen.
He's pre-mocking it as if it's just out of the bounds of possibility, when it is not just within the bounds of possibility, but highly likely they'll probably both get about 85 million votes. That is well within the bounds of possibility. So anyways,
I don't think he will, but yeah.
So I hated that.
Yeah,
anyway,
I really did.
Go on.
And but the two remarks I would make is just that the tenor of this, just even by Trump standards, was kind of beyond the pale. And the first guy, Tony Hinchcliffe or whatever his name on, who's a really low rent roast kind of comic in America, is that he had a whole bunch of other things. He made a joke about Latinos having lots of babies. There was this vague kind of anti-Semitic thing about Jews throwing paper. There was some remark about blacks and watermelons. These are all just racist tropes. And there's this thing on the right where they play around with it, like, "Ooh, I guess I'm a racist. I'm not supposed to mention watermelons." There's all this kind of genuflecting and double reverse irony and things like this. But I'll tell you something. There's something really interesting about the Puerto Rican thing, and I could be wrong. And of course, if you don't know, what's happened is that this caused a huge flashpoint. A lot of people pointed at that there's a huge Puerto Rican population, a couple of important states, notably Pennsylvania. A lot of prominent Puerto Rican stars like Bad Bunny, J-Lo, Ricky Martin have all come out. Even Geraldo Rivera was on Wolf the other night, really laying into Trump.
The Puerto Ricans are extremely likely to determine who wins Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it really could be. So it's very
extremely
ironic.
likely. There's more than enough of them in Pennsylvania.
Which will be fun. But I just really just want to make one thing. I don't know if you felt it this way, but when I can't remember if I was actually watching it the first time or if I'd heard it and I went back. But I got to say, of all the things that have happened, and there have been so many awful things that have come out of the Trump administration, I can't think of something that got me in the stomach quite that bad. Like to say that these disadvantaged people, they're a territory of an imperial power. Most Americans don't like them. There's all this prejudice against, they're called PRs or whatever like that. And at the same time, there's a remarkable history of Puerto Ricans in America and blah, 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 blah. But we all understand that it's a poor Caribbean nation. It got battered by this hurricane. It's kind of unfair. It's not a state. It's not a separate country. It's just going to be in limbo for the rest of its world. All these terrible things. And here's this, excuse my French, asshole standing in Madison Square Garden, the capital of the free world, and calling them a floating pile of garbage. I mean, I swear to God, it makes me sick to my stomach. And right now I'm on the verge of just being emotionally. I can't think of anything so cruel and so glib and unnecessary, and it just shows you the space they're in. Like, why would you say that about these people? I mean, he's sitting there, he's this Camille, oh yeah, I get to stay in the Four Seasons. He had all these riffs about what a cool guy he was. And then he sits there and he tells these poor people, living in the Caribbean, that you're living on an island of garbage.
The thing which I found really strange about that, and I don't know if analyzing comedy is gonna really hit the spot for you, Bill, because you're not loving the joke. But the thing which I found strange about it is it came out of nowhere. It wasn't
right. It just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it wasn't like there was a bit about Puerto Ricans leading up to it, or they're in the news, or Puerto Rico is in the news, or there was some reference to something else. It was just a random reference. It was just a drive-by based on nothing, in referring to nothing. Like he could have, he could have made the same joke about Jamaica or any other island.
Yeah.
It was just this complete, or Cuba. It was just this very strange, like it was a joke with no context.
Right. And
It wasn't taken out of context. There was no context.
Right. And it'd be one thing, it would have been great if there'd been like, you know, this huge Puerto Rican delegation behind him or something like that. I mean, that's like, there's a context, like, oh, there's all these people from state. I'm going to make a big joke about Arkansas. Like that actually would have been, but it just felt so cruel. And
Well, I was going to say on that note, the I was talking about Tony Hinchcliffe for a second, then we can move on to other bits. I mean, or you might have more to say about him. Those who know me well know I'm unlikely to be offended by anything. That's not really my way. And that's true. But I do feel, I just don't know why he was there. Like, I don't know why they invited him, and I don't know why he accepted it. I thought from both sides, they were on a hiding to nothing. I think it was really poorly thought through. And the reason for that is this. Tony Hinchcliffe, now I know you're not going to buy this, but I think he is a good roast comedian. Like the roast of Tom Brady, he was fantastic.
You really thought that?
Yeah, I think it was good, Tom Brady.
Because I was getting confused with Nick Kroll. Yeah, he kind of looks like Nick Kroll.
He does look a bit like
funny,
Nick.
though. Yeah.
He looks a bit like Nick Kroll. Nick Kroll's a very different cat.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tony Hinchcliffe and Nikki Glaser are the two really good roast comedians around at the moment. Right, both of them. They do the rounds. They do great.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Nikki Glaser is also a good stand-up comedian. Tony Hinchcliffe is not a good stand-up comedian. Even though he is a stand-up comedian, he's a good roaster. He's not a good stand-up comedian, right? His thing is roasting, and that's it. I don't know. Have you watched Kill Tony at all, his podcast?
No.
Okay. His podcast that's made him famous, that's been around for like a decade, is essentially they get open micers up who are often horrifically bad, and then him and 3 or 4 other comedians just pay the shit out of them. Yeah. That's how Kill Tony works. That's what he does. He's really good at someone's got a disability, and he makes lots of disability jokes. Like, just whatever the situation is, he just goes them. That's what he's good at, right? And you might find that entire form of humor horrible. I know plenty of people who do. But my point is, he's good at that form of humor. That's all he does. Yeah. And that makes him entirely unsuitable for a political rally. That's the last person you would get to be your comedian at a political rally, right? And the reason for that is simple. The roast format involves, you just mentioned it before, when you're saying with the Puerto Ricans, if they were behind him, it might have been a bit different.
You're saying it to their face.
Yes, the roast format involves criticizing people to their face in an over-the-top way. That's how it works. You be horrible to someone who's sitting there smiling at you and laughing along with it.
Because you know they're going to come back and get you.
Exactly. Okay. Everyone gets it. And Tony Hinchcliffe is great at taking it, just like he's great at giving it out. And that works. That works, that form where everyone's copying it. It's all going, oh, and no one's taking it seriously. And everyone has the opportunity to keep their dignity, because they get their dignity, they obtain their dignities by smiling through it and taking the joke.
Yeah, though I do want to disagree because I love those roasts. I mean, I know them, but I just thought he was like one of the worst people at Brady. And for example, like Nikki Glaser is a killer.
She's a
stone cold killer. And I don't know if you remember, but his whole thing about it, like, Nikki Glaser, who are you? Where did you come from, Nikki Glaser? I guess you're getting stuff down our throats. Like, that was his joke about Nikki Glaser. And it just, it didn't make any sense because she's a killer and he's a nobody. And then, and so I actually remember, because I watched that. I watched it a couple times actually, and I just kind of, I don't really know that guy.
That's okay. We can agree to disagree. But what I'm saying is that if you take the person, if you have the roast format without the person being there, it goes from being fun that everyone can enjoy to being nasty, and to being cruel, and to being bullying, and to being kind of shitty. Yeah. And that is what that's a situation he was in this routine. He just could not, there's no way he could do what he does and win in this situation. So this is why I don't know why he said yes to this gig.
I agree.
Like, I know he loves Trump, but it was just an idiot to say yes to this gig. And so I think it was never going to work. And by the way, it was one of his worst routines.
It was bad.
It was a terrible routine.
Just like he would make jokes based on wrong words, and then he would just say ridiculous things like, I remember he said, "Oh, he's, meaning Trump, is the worst, the most anti-war president ever, and Hillary called him a Nazi.
Yeah.
And then you go, wait, who's the most? Wait, Trump, what? Wait, what did Hillary do? Wait, Hillary didn't call him a Nazi. It was his chief of staff.
Yeah.
Like just stuff like that. He just felt like he drunk the Kool-Aid and was just lying.
It was a bad routine.
And
It really was.
my other thing he said I loved was, well, it's really divisive for a comedian to talk about his political beliefs. Like he was being so brave. And every comedian talks. I mean, that's like the staple of political comedy. It's just like, it felt like everything you said was really bad.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that he sucked.
Yeah.
But I honestly think that even the greatest, even if you got Jeff Ross up there, the king of all roasters.
Oh, you think he?
I think he would have died.
Yeah, he's smart enough to have figured it out, though.
Yeah.
I like Jeff Ross.
Yeah.
And people should, just before we close this out, we should know that Donald Trump, they've been really going after him, trying to get him to back down. He's like, oh, I don't know that guy. I don't know what happened. I didn't hear him. And but Trump also said it was like a love fest, an absolute love fest, and it was my honor to be involved, which is not true, which is true. And I just think we should also just mention that, Donald Trump himself says that America is now a garbage bin. That's one of his big go-to things now. We're just a big pile of garbage and stuff like that. And and people in Australia know about the poem on the Statue of Liberty, right?
Yeah, I think they do.
Yeah.
I hope they do.
I mean, just for the record.
Peppers know.
But just for the record, the most famous statue in America, one of the most famous poems, it said, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp behind the golden door. And it's just like they're standing miles away from this poem that embodies the American world. And of course, you had Stephen Miller saying, America is for Americans and Americans only, which is another just incredibly ridiculous and disturbing thing for a politician.
I think we should play. I want to play that whole section,
Okay, sure.
that Steve Miller section, because look, there was a lot of Nazi talk about this rally, and I thought that a lot of the Nazi talk was kind of ridiculous. Like a lot of the rally was just a Trump rally, a very long Trump rally. But like in particular, days beforehand, like Hillary Clinton was warming up like 2 days beforehand saying, oh.
And one other thing that you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939.
Just because it's at Madison Square Garden doesn't make it a Nazi thing. Lots of stuff has been held at Madison Square Garden. It's one of the premier venues in New York. Like they've been, like her husband's convention was at Madison Square Garden, and like Jimmy Carter's convention was at Madison Square Garden. JFK's birthday was at Madison Square Garden, etc. George W. Bush's convention was at Madison Square Garden. Like it's just the fact it's Madison Square Garden doesn't matter. I would have thought, and I want to read you a section from Philip Bumps. I mentioned this on Play America, but I'll read you the whole section from Philip Bump in the Washington Post, trying to build the case that this was, that there's some parallel between this and the Nazi rally in 1939. You've probably already heard about the 1939 event, thanks to the Academy Award nominated short film Night at the Garden. Organised by a group called the German American Bund, the event was ostensibly a celebration of George Washington's 207th birthday. In reality, it was a celebration of the ascent of Germany's Third Reich and excoriation of the purported nefarious influence of Jewish people in the United States. As detailed in Anani Bernstein's 2013 book, Swastika Nation, the 1939 event, centered on overlaying German fascism onto American patriotism, began with the singing of the national anthem, as did Trump's rally on Sunday. As do many garden events, he puts in brackets. Then and now, the arena was also bedecked in red, white, and blue. Speakers in 1939 lamented government spending, railed against Marxism, and complained about how information negative to their allies was played up and twisted to fan the flames of hate in the hearts of Americans by the news media. Similar arguments were raised at Trump's rally as well. Free America, the crowd chanted in 1939, while Trump speakers pledged that he would save America, with the 2024 crowd chanting USA, USA. The central difference between the two rallies, of course, is that the focus of the Bund rally was on Germany's form of government, and in particular, its hostility to Jewish people. Trump's rally was often ostentatiously pro-Jewish, mostly by being unabashedly pro-Israel. But Sunday's event was similarly focused on a purported threat to the nation, immigrants and foreign actors bent on tearing the country apart. Okay, so what they had in common was the national anthem, red, white, and blue, lamenting government spending, criticizing Marxists, and chanting something loosely connected to America. What they didn't have in common was that Trump's rally was often about immigration, and the Nazi one was often about Jews. I would say the differences between them are more important than what they had in common. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Nazi stuff makes me a little bit uncomfortable. However, the comments from John Kelly and people like that, I think, are very relative. But I think people should be careful using the phrase Nazis.
But that's exactly why I think they should be particularly careful in this case, because the Nazism is already part of the campaign.
Yeah.
Because of John Kelly and because of those other things. And those things are legit. Like quotes where Trump is citing Hitler, that's a legit part of the campaign.
Right.
But that means you shouldn't just piss around and throw Hitler around willy-nilly in other parts, because it makes it seem like you're being exploitative, and it makes it seem like the other bits shouldn't be taken seriously. So if you want the other bits to be taken seriously, you shouldn't treat Hitler and Nazism cheaply in other contexts and unnecessarily in other contexts, I would suggest. Yeah. Anyway, the reason I brought that up is to then say the one bit of this rally that was actually Third Reichy was Stephen Miller,
right?
Because he's always Third Reichy.
Yeah.
And so let's listen to what he had to say.
He was fighting for your children, for your wives, your husbands, everyone that you love and know in the world. The right to live in a country where criminal gangs cannot just cross our border and rape and murder with impunity. Think about how corrupt and hateful and evil a system is that allows gangs to come into this country and rape and murder little girls. I'm not just saying that. You've read the stories. It happens every day. You read one of these heartbreaking headlines. Who's going to stand up for our daughters? Who's going to stand up for the girls of America, the women of America, the families of America? Who's going to stand up and say, the cartels are gone, the criminal migrants are gone, the gangs are gone, America is for Americans and Americans only? One man, and that man, ladies and gentlemen, that man took a bullet for you. He took a bullet for democracy. And all we are asking in return is for 9 days.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I really dislike that guy.
And I'm sure people know this about how the Republican Party has changed. Now, Ronald Reagan was a liar in a lot of ways and said a lot of things weren't true. But Ronald Reagan's famous statement about immigration?
I know it was different.
Yeah. So just for example, so when I was growing up, you hear this from the president: an immigrant can live in France, but not become a Frenchman. He can live in Germany, but not become a German. He can live in Japan, but not become Japanese. But anyone from any part of the world can come to America and become an American. So that was the generic statement of, even if it wasn't entirely sincere, that was the kind of ringing standard of the time.
So he didn't say that immigrants rape and murder babies every day?
Yeah, and that they're vermin and they're destroying the blood of Americans.
Just so you know, little girls aren't being raped and murdered by immigrants every day. That is what they call an exaggeration.
Exactly. Hey, I have one other question for you about this. Hold on, let me find it. Do you know who Abdul Fattah Jandali is?
No.
I'll give you a hint. He was born in Syria.
Yeah.
And he was one of those weird, disturbing, disgusting Muslim immigrants.
Is this Steve Jobs?
Yes, Steve Jobs' dad. Steve Jobs' dad.
His dad. Okay, yeah, that's right.
So again, they're just so dishonest about this, and they don't talk that obviously the vast majority of immigrants who come to America are people who want a better life and want to do well.
Of course.
And if countries were smart, they would be doing things to stop those people from coming to America and saying, no, we want you here to help build up our economy.
Totally. Look, I'm not saying there aren't migrant crimes, whatever the hell Trump calls them, but you can't deny that the vast majority of migrants, illegal immigrants as well, who come to America are coming to America to work. Like, it's just a fact.
Right. And of
It's
course,
just-
and again, as someone who lived in Phoenix, Phoenix is a very high Latino population. They're very invisible in a lot of ways. I mean, you can live in Phoenix and not see too many Hispanic people because there's that kind of natural segregation. But just imagine if you are an illegal immigrant from Mexico and you're driving around Phoenix. Are you speeding? Are you shoplifting? Are you forgetting to put your right turn signal on?
Yeah, no, you're
Are
trying-
you covering the debris in the back of your truck the way the rule is? Or are you doing things that could draw the attention of law enforcement and pull you over?
You're trying to keep your nose clean.
It's
Of
just
course
crazy.
not.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
And so anyway, so if I was the Democrats, I'd be talking less about Nazis and more about Stephen Miller. Because to me, I mean, out of every, like, Project 2025, that's bullshit. They're not following Project 2025. They're following Stephen Miller, though.
Yeah.
He's scary. He's real. And 100%, he's going to be involved in immigration. You know that for a fact. That guy there is going to be involved with immigration. He's probably going to be running the great deportation. He's probably going to be in charge of that bloody thing. That guy that we just heard. That is what you should attack them on, because that's real. And that is scary.
Yeah.
He's definitely the scariest part of the Trump administration, if you ask me. Anyway,
I agree.
and let's not forget, he's the guy in 2017 who said this. I can't play this enough. I just love this graph.
But I think the point, John, is that the president has enormous powers, is beyond anything we've ever seen before. The end result of this, though, is that our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
That is scary.
That's very scary.
His eyes are so dead. It's just, anyway. What else would you like to talk about with Madison Square Garden? Because I've got other things,
That's
but
it. That's all I had
That's
to
it for
say.
you? Okay, well, I'll tell you what I want to talk about as well on this. I want to talk about the policy which came out, which, like, there's, what am I doing?
What time is it? It's policy time.
What time is it? It's policy time.
Wait, how does Trump dance? How does
yeah.
Trump? Yeah.
Oh, yes. That's it. Lucky's got it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, no. It's a little more like this. No, because they say it's the double jerk off move. That's like the way he goes.
He's
yeah.
so versatile, Bill. He's got so many moves with his elbows and arms. Honestly, this barely deserves that sting because this is some terrible policy. But, I'll take it where I can get it. There were two policies revealed by Donald Trump during his speech. I've got clips on both of them. This is the first one.
I'm announcing a new policy today that I will support a tax credit for family caregivers who take care of a parent or a loved one. It's about time that they were recognized, right? They add so much to our country and are never spoken of, ever, but they're going to be spoken of now. Thank you all very much.
Now, to be fair, they were spoken of when Kamala Harris spent an entire week talking about funding at-home care through Medicare 2 weeks ago. So that's what they call a ripoff. Although, to be honest, I don't care about policy ripoffs. If a good idea is a good idea. If both sides want to use the same good idea, I'm fine with that. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if carers have been ignored until now and you want to outbid each other on how you're going to help them, great. No problems from me. My problem is that, I should say, before I tell you my problem, Kamala Harris should talk more about it, because I looked at the tweet with that video I just played. It's a Trump tweet. And I looked underneath it in the replies. There was like 2 people out of thousands who were aware of Kamala Harris having a similar policy.
Yeah.
It has not cut through. In fact, there were more people saying things like, oh, Kamala Harris is going to rip this off for sure, than saying, that's Kamala Harris's policy.
Yeah. That's so funny.
So maybe she needs to, I know that's a testimony to the bubbles that we're all in, but she could afford to get out there more and push that policy, I would have thought, because it is certainly one of the more cut-through policies of this campaign. But okay, so my problem, though, is it's so poorly thought out. He says there's going to be a tax break for carers. How does that work? Like they don't have expenses. What's the tax break for?
Yeah.
How much is the tax break? What do you have to do to get the tax break? Half an hour care? 3 hours care? Like, where's the cutoff? What? Like, it's really unclear what form this tax break takes and in what circumstances. How's it paid for? There's no detail. There's zero detail. Like, it was just a brain fart. It's like he wrote it on a napkin in the limo on the way to the speech.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no thought at all. I had concerns about Harris's policy being undercooked. That was like a PhD thesis compared to this policy. Like this was just so undercooked. So that's why I say it's barely policy. It's just a thought. But anyway, I've got nothing else to add because there's so little detail. I have no idea what it is. I mean, I think there's very little chance of it being enacted because he clearly doesn't care enough to put any thought into it. But do you have any thoughts about that policy?
No, I just admire you taking it seriously to the extent you did, because every time he speaks now, he has some new thing that costs a lot of money and that doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a very complicated thing, and I don't see it going anywhere.
This policy is even worse. Let's play this one.
And I'm hereby calling for the death penalty for any migrant that kills an American citizen or a law enforcement officer.
Okay, so that is some A-grade authoritarian bullshit we just heard there. What does migrant mean for a start? Does that mean an illegal immigrant? Or someone there legally seeking asylum? Or someone there legally on a temporary protection visa? What you get the death penalty not because of the severity or the brutality of your crime, but because of your immigration status. That's just bizarre. The only thing that could make that policy more stupid, in my view, is people chanting USA, USA, USA in response to a policy that's stupid, which calls for the death penalty. Who chants USA in response to the death penalty? Yeah. Like it's like that is the closest we have gotten to the actual movie Idiocracy. Like, I know it's a cliche, people talk about Idiocracy.
Absolutely.
That is literally, that dude with the long brown hair, the President Comanche or whatever, that's the kind of thing he would talk about killing someone. And people going, USA, USA. That actually is something that would happen in that movie. So that there, by the way, is a window into, I know there's not much policy chat there, but that wasn't much of a policy. That there is a window into what I fear from the next 4 years. I fear us all becoming that much stupider and more savage, which is what happened in the first 4 years. Everyone became stupider and more savage as a result of the first 4 years of Trump. And I worry that will become even more so in the next 4 years. And the reason why I say that, like there might be some Democrats listening to this going, not me, but I honestly think like just everyone became dumber. I think certain people followed Trump and then other people responded to that. And then there was a response to the response and there was a response to the response to the response and so on. And it just became more and more childish and more knee jerk and just ugly. And like sometimes leadership does matter, despite what I began this podcast with about how leaders are often all the same. Sometimes leadership does matter in terms of the example it sets. And I worry that's the kind of stuff that worries me the most.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tension because it's that classic thing. It's like the Michelle Obama thing when they go low or we go high, and that old line about you don't want to get into a fight with a pig. You know, you both get dirty, and the pig likes it. And there's always this tension between going at the other side with the same vehemence and sort of lack of integrity that they do, or trying to stay high. But you can also see how the Democrats were a little bruised because, you know, I lived through the 2016 campaign and I thought Clinton ran a very good, positive campaign. I mean, there's things about that give me little tremors today, you know, when I see Kamala Harris doing a debate with him and kind of laughing merrily at the crazy things Trump said, because I remember Hillary Clinton doing that in 2016. I remember all the enthusiasm at the end for Hillary Clinton. I thought a lot of people thought she was going to be, it was one of the most mismatched presidential matchups in American history. And we all know what happened.
We do know what happened. There's one other bit I want to play from the Madison Square Garden rally before we move on, which was involving Elon Musk, which also was a bit dumb. This guy, Elon, is getting increasingly carried away at these rallies.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
I mean, at the end of the day, you're being taxed. You're being taxed. All government spending is taxation. So whether it's direct taxation or all government spending, it's either becomes inflation or it's direct taxation. Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that.
He makes a strong argument. That was a very nuanced, sophisticated take on that.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, the 2024 budget's actually got $6.7 trillion of spending. He reckons he can cut $2 trillion, does he? Social Security plus Medicare is $2.3 trillion. Trump promised not to touch them. Add the net interest on the debt, that's $880 billion. Now we're up to $3.1 trillion. Add defense, that's $870 billion. Trump says he's going to increase spending on defense. So that gets us to, that's $4 trillion. Then add veterans' pensions. You can't cut them. That's $325 billion. Add Medicaid, healthcare for the poor. Good luck trying to cut that. That's $600 billion. That's $5 trillion so far. So that leaves $1.7 trillion. Elon would need to cut literally everything else in the budget. The lot. Department of Justice, gone. Homeland Security,
Commerce,
gone.
agriculture.
Border Patrol, gone. National parks, food stamps, gone. Education, NASA, gone. He probably would cut NASA.
National parks, highways.
EPA, farm support, gone. Research, gone. The State Department, gone. The Weather Service, everything, gone. You still wouldn't get the $2 trillion. So that is really dumb. And it's just one more time I've been very disappointed with someone who I know knows better than that. But,
yeah, they're all caught up. It's that weird affect. They're all caught up in this enthusiasm, like they're all stoned at a party or something, and just saying just ridiculous, nonsensical stuff. And,
Okay,
and of course, Trump was president, you'll remember, and he had an opportunity to cut the deficit.
Of course, yeah. And now look, we've got one more section. We've got one more bill section to go through before you got to go. But I want to throw in just one little thing. It's just a teensy little thing about Biden, which you're not going to hear anywhere else. This is a homegrown theory. This was really this is carrying on something I talked about a few months back. Really interesting from the Bob Woodward book, which I'll read you a quote. I'll read you a quote from the Woodward book. This is about some of the early signs of Biden's mental decline from the 19th of June, 2023. Bill? Mm-hmm. The first fundraiser hosted by Kevin Scott, the Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft, at his home in Los Gatos on June 19, was attended by 38 guests, including some of the most serious Democrat donors in the Valley. The event raised $2.7 million for Biden's re-election fund. Guests, however, said that Biden was frighteningly awful. It was like your 87-year-old senile grandfather wandering around the room, saying to women guests, "Your eyes are so beautiful." Biden, who was 80, had flown in from Washington earlier that day. A donor acknowledged he'd probably woken up very early, but appeared tired. He could not wait to sit down and only took 2 prearranged questions. He carried a handful of note cards with the answers printed out, but even then seemed to wander off point. At a second, much larger fundraiser that same day, hosted by venture capitalist Stephen Wesley, the former state controller and a big Tesla investor, and his wife Anita Yu, attendees reported an almost opposite experience with President Biden. He was energetic, the host told others. He wouldn't sit down for 2 hours. Okay, so Biden was super geriatric earlier in the day, and then he was full of beans later in the day, right? Okay. I want to read you another passage from later in the book. Blinken knew Hunter's struggles had derailed Biden emotionally much, much more than any outsider or the public realized. Another of Blinken's friends called this the real war, the battle that affected Biden more than Ukraine, more than Israel. The guilt was overwhelming. If he were not president, my beautiful boy, my little boy, would not be under the crushing scrutiny of all the investigations, he'd say. Biden was heartbroken. Now, that there is Biden and Woodward's speculation. But shall we go back to June 19, 2023 again, that day when he started off horrible and then was great? Because that happens to be a special day for two reasons. Number one, during the day of June 19, 2023, two whistleblowers, IRS's Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, who close watchers of the show will recognize, were testifying to Congress about how there was a conspiracy in the DOJ to protect Hunter Biden. This was the moment when the Hunter Biden shit hit the fan. That day. That was when Hunter Biden started to be in serious public trouble. Also on June 19, 2023, was the day when Hunter Biden's defense were informed that there was an ongoing investigation into Hunter that they weren't even aware of until that moment. So then they tried to organize a plea deal immediately, and they got it immediately, like all in the same day. And so, this is at the end of the day, it looked like it was a successful plea deal. This is a quote from Hunter's lawyer, Chris Clark, what he wrote in his journal that day. I then asked her directly whether there was any other open or pending investigation of Mr. Biden overseen by the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, and she responded there was not another open or pending investigation. So they thought they were home free. So maybe it is indeed true, Bill, that when Hunter was in deep shit, it really took a bite out of Joe Biden. And he was a lot better when Hunter was out of trouble. Maybe Joe Biden was racked with guilt and anger. What does this got to do with PEP? What this has to do with PEP is, if you recall, when Joe Biden had that horrible debate, I made the point at the time that the one thing no one's talking about was that was the week of Hunter Biden's trial.
Mm-hmm.
That Joe Biden spent that entire week freaking out about Hunter Biden, who ended up being convicted. And then he had the debate straight after.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that Joe Biden wasn't too old and they didn't need to resign. I've been saying for 18 months that Joe Biden couldn't last 6 more years and he should have resigned after the midterms. I've been saying that the whole time. But I am saying it's possible that Joe Biden's symptoms were much, much worse when Hunter Biden was struggling. And if they were trying to cripple Joe Biden by prosecuting Hunter, crippling him with impeachments, they might have succeeded in crippling him through a different route.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to throw that out there.
I think that's really fair because there is another thing, obviously Hunter Biden deserves everything he gets. It's sad, but that's the way America treats people who are addicts. And, all the stuff about his alleged, corruption, malfeasance, I think all that is, it's possible that he's sleazy. My assumption has always been that Biden's smart enough not to get involved in any of that stuff. And at the same time, people who are involved with addicts, it's very hard. You have to let them, you have to step away from them. You can't enable them, and maybe he's enabled them too much. But at heart, there's this immense cruelty in the persecution of him. And of course, it was designed to affect Biden. So it's possible. On the other hand, he has been in public for 50, 60 years. He knows how to handle himself. So I think that could certainly have helped, but obviously his age was an issue.
Bill, this is your last section before you got to go and catch your bus.
Okay.
Tell me who's going to win, and tell me, this is the week before the election, tell me anything you want to tell me about the election.
I just have one thing I wanted to say. Okay.
All right.
And that, because obviously everything we saw in 2016 was the most remarkable thing that's ever happened in American politics, I think, 2016.
Yep.
What I always have said that what happened in 2020 actually was even crazier, given the 4 years of the Trump administration. The fact that he was nearly reelected is something I find completely unaccountable, even more than 2016. Okay. I mean, really, I think it's
Yeah.
not appreciated how insane the 2020 election was.
The fact that he was nearly re-elected in the middle of COVID,
Yeah.
when
People are dying in the streets.
it's fair to
in
say,
red states.
Yeah, it's fair to say things weren't going great in America with his COVID governance,
And also
at that
just the
point in time.
chaos and the nastiness. So I'm not
That is
making
amazing.
any predictions. Okay, I'm not making predictions.
That's
I just
fine.
have this one thing in my head, and I just want to say it.
Say it, please.
What if we're overthinking this?
Yeah.
Okay, that it's a tied race, let's say, because of the polls, and it's the polls just give me such a headache because of all the things you guys talk about all the time. I mean, we really don't know. They're making projections about who the voting body is, and you have all these new voters, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, if 30 years ago you went to sleep and you woke up and you told someone the details of this election, okay? So this is just I'm not kind of constructing, if this happens, then this happens, she's going to win.
Yeah,
okay.
I understand.
I'm just saying all these things together.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just say the polls are correct. You have a tied election.
Sure.
Okay. You have a guy who has lost twice.
Yep.
Okay. Lost the popular vote twice. He was thrown out of office.
Yeah.
As I'm fond of saying, I know you guys talked about this and parsed it. A larger percentage of Americans voted for Joe Biden to throw Donald Trump out of office than voted for Ronald Reagan to throw Jimmy Carter out of office.
We have talked about this, and
Okay.
the third party candidate.
There is an
Johnson.
asterisk.
Yes.
But still, there was an incumbent president and a guy knocked him out of office. Joe Biden got a higher percentage of the popular vote than Ronald Reagan did. Okay? Ronald Reagan's votes obviously were spread around the country in a different way.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about someone who's been thrown out of office.
Yeah.
Okay? There is an unprecedented gender gap this time.
Yes.
Okay? Women vote more than men do.
Yep.
Okay? Women are also easier to get out to vote than men. Okay? Which obviously benefits Harris.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's strategy, particularly in these last weeks, has been completely unbridled, doubling down on his base. He's
Yep.
gotten worse and worse and worse. Okay. And it's very hard as a journalist because obviously you want to look at these things objectively, but by any objective standard, the stuff he's saying is vile and racist and awful and hateful and cruel and mean. And it's designed to get people out who feel that way. It's a terrible thing to watch. Okay. Kamala Harris is getting her base out. She's getting the Trump haters out. Okay. And she's making inroads into the middle, peeling off Republicans. She's gotten in remarkable Republicans.
She's certainly
Okay?
going for the Republicans. Yeah.
There's been this crazy shift in politics in America in my lifetime. It is just crazy. When I was growing up, suburban white people voted for Ronald Reagan, voted for Republicans. They were just the most, and the way Ronald Reagan took off into the suburbs completely upended American politics for 40 years. Okay. Now that's completely switched. The most reliable voters are now Democrats, college-educated suburban people. They have the money, they have influence, and they come out and vote. Which would you rather be doing? Would you rather be getting suburban soccer moms out to vote or Joe Rogan fans out to vote? Okay. Another thing people forget is that the rise of this early voting and voting by mail really obviously turned a corner 4 years ago. That it's easier to vote now than it ever has been.
Yep.
Okay, notwithstanding the Republican opponents to it.
Yep.
There's all this talk about African American voters. In the end, who would you rather be to get African American voters out? Would you rather be the black candidate or Donald Trump?
Well,
Okay.
That's fine, but all I'd say is that Donald Trump's not trying to win black voters. Donald Trump's trying to hold Harris to 70% of black
Right,
voters.
right.
And that will make a difference if he does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's obviously this portion that hasn't voted yet, that hasn't committed yet. And which side would you rather be?
Sure.
I mean, traditionally,
Yeah.
I just feel like the black voters are going to come home. By most reports, obviously we don't know ourselves, but by most reports, the Democrats have this ground game.
Yes.
And I want to get more about that in a second, but it's generally considered, and that what the Trump campaign has been doing reportedly is it's said that they've outsourced it to all these outsourcing groups, okay, who obviously are new at it. Granted, they have a lot of money and they have this, I'm sure they're trying to do things, but I'm just saying, would you rather have the Democratic Party's ground game operation, which has been gearing up to this for 4 years, or would you rather have Charlie Kirk doing your ground game?
Yeah.
Obviously, money matters to some extent. Kamala Harris has more money that we know about. We've heard, remember the Tom Bradley effect?
Yes.
He was the mayor of Los
explain that?
Angeles, very popular black candidate. This is, 84, I think, ran for governor of California. He was going to win. He was this completely, marvelous, cool, together person who tamed Los Angeles running for governor, and he lost at the last minute. A lot of people said they were going to vote for him, but in the end, he was black and they weren't going to vote for him. So it's called the Tom Bradley effect. Okay. That, I don't know if it's actually proven or not, but let's just say it's true. But one of the interesting things that's happened in this realignment is all the goddamn racists are on the Republican Party now. There used to be some of the Democratic Party, working class, union guys, whatever, fine. But boy, they're just not in the Democratic Party anymore. And so I don't know to the extent that's actually a thing. And obviously Obama broke that ceiling. And then to go back to the ground game thing, the one thing you can say about the Democrats, who are completely incompetent, and I think they're bad at messaging, and they've done all these silly things in my lifetime. But you got to admit that from David Plouffe on down, I mean, they have a murderer's row. Every serious, brilliant Democratic strategist is in the room. A lot of Republicans as well. Nobody's messing around. I mean, I saw one article in Politico a few weeks ago about some dissension at some state. I forget what it was, but there's no leaks. Everyone's together. Nobody is messing around. I mean, I can't, with the exception of Reagan in 84, I mean, they had quite an operation then. I mean, there is a massive, if you want to talk about the deep state, there's a deep state running this election, and they are not messing around. Nobody's screwing around, right? Yeah. And then finally, barring something crazy happened last week, all the fundamentals are actually good, notwithstanding all the carping about inflation. Okay. You got inflation's going down, unemployment's down, crime's down, the Dow is breaking records. I mean, it's, she could be doing a kind of Morning in America thing. She really could be. And then finally, with the foreign policy thing, I don't think people quite appreciate that Americans don't care about foreign policy. They absolutely do not care about foreign policy. And I don't think she's ultimately going to lose any votes on the left because of the Israeli thing, because Trump is so much worse. And then the Ukraine thing only rebounds to her benefit because only crazy people are not in support of helping Ukraine. So, so my argument isn't that she's going to win, but I mean, let's just say it's a tied race. Yeah. Would you, I mean, I forget how many, I think I had 11 things. Yeah. I mean, if each of those 11 things are worth a quarter of a point, it's determinative. And so my question to you is, are we overthinking this?
What you've done there is you've done one of my favorite things to do before an election. And I've done exactly the same thing. And I'll give you
glad to hear that.
I'll give you the benefits of what I've been doing, which is what I call pre-hindsight. To think, okay, what's going to be the hindsight?
Oh, absolutely. That's a good point.
In 3 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Because in 3 weeks' time, there's going to be a narrative. They go, well, we should have seen it coming. There was this obvious thing all along, which we didn't see. And now look at the exit polls, it's really obvious. What's that going to be? And I like to think before the election what it's going to be. And I think about, because the truth is, there's usually more than one. There's usually 20 of them that could be. And we don't know which one it's going to be until we look at the exit polls. So what I've done is I've compiled my list. And there's a bit of overlap with your list because, they're rational thoughts.
Yeah.
So this is my pre-hindsight.
Oh, good.
Okay. Number one. So first I want to go through the ones that people might be the hindsight if Harris pulls out a victory. Number one, the blue wall. People have been talking about Arizona and Georgia and North Carolina and Nevada till they're blue in the face, and none of them matter. From the last 6 months, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin have always polled better than the other states the whole time, almost the entire time Harris has been ahead. Even now, when she's at pretty much a low point for the last 3 months, she's still ahead in all 3 states in most polls, and 1 or 2 she's down by like 0.1 of a point. She hasn't been down by half a point, by more than half a point in any of those 3 states at any point in time from any respectable pollster. In fact, there is a decent chance that she could win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote.
Right, that's another interesting thing.
Because she's doing so much better in those 3 states than in any other state. Like the Democrats have been concentrating on those states the whole time. And so that might be hindsight in the future going, if she wins just those 3 states and then ends up getting 270 electoral college votes, they'll go, we should have seen it coming. The whole time, those states have been stronger than the rest. So that's one. That next one, you've already mentioned the Republicans. The Nikki Haley voters. They've been there the entire time. They've never gone away. They were there in the Republican primary. They were there long after Donald Trump sewed up the Republican primary. In every poll, they've been there. In the New York Times Siena polls, 10% of Republicans not supporting Trump. They've been there the whole time. And if you look at the people, the defectors in 2020, it was 5%. It was 4% from each side. If one person has 10% defectors, they're going to lose. The Nikki Haley voters may well lose it for Trump. As you say, Harris has been pitching them as hard as she possibly can.
And he's helping her on the other side by alienating them.
Yeah. And she's been carrying Liz Cheney along like they're Siamese twins. They've been trying to hit those voters as hard as they possibly can. So that might be hindsight as well. It was the Nikki Haley voters. Next one, abortion. Exactly the same thing happened in 2022, where we stopped talking about abortion with about a month to go in the election. And people go, oh, it's worn out. It's not polling so well anymore. It's like the 4th most important issue. And then bang, abortion was everywhere after the election. It turned out to be an abortion election after all. It's just the women were a little bit quiet about it. And it's the same thing might happen again. It might be bang, out come the white women who happen to be Kamala Harris's best demographic, also happen to be the biggest demographic in America. Like if they come out in force with like 85% turnout or something like that and just bang, they'll just wipe out everyone else. There's too many of them. So that might be something we might look back on in 3 weeks and go, shit, it was an abortion election after all.
Can I just make another thing that we also got to remember is that a lot of people in any election, they're really regular voters and they're not like not low information voters or something, but stuff happens. They end up not being able to vote. I mean, just screw up. And even just these little impetuses of stuff like that. Oh my God, I got to put that thing in the mail. Even 1% of women, that's 0.5% of the voting bloc, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I might add, by the way, if this is the hindsight in looking back going, shit, it was an abortion election after all, we might look back on that Trump super PAC trying to defend abortion with an ad with a week to go, this ad right here.
I've never voted for Trump, but when he was president, life was a lot better. I trust him on the economy and on keeping us safe. Freedom to choose is also important to me, and there's been a lot of talk on where he stands. But he's been clear. He does not support a federal abortion ban.
I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban.
Trump does support reasonable exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. His position is my position, and that's why I'm with Trump.
And we might go, wow, Trump saw it coming as well, or Trump's team saw it coming as well. The actual campaigners knew this was an abortion election, but we didn't. And we were too busy talking about fascism and talking about a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Number 3, the next one, democracy. Maybe this happened in 2022 as well. It ended up being much more of a democracy election than we thought it was going to be. We thought that was a real dud policy, a dud topic. And we wondered why they were going on so much about it, why Biden was going on so much about that. It turned out to be a good idea. When you looked at the exit polls, democracy ended up being one of the biggest issues. Gallup put out their biggest issues of the election the other day, but democracy was the second top issue. 49% said it was extremely important, second only to the economy, which was on 52%, not much more. It might be a democracy election. They're certainly trying to make it a democracy election. And there was an ABC Ipsos poll the other day where 49% thought Trump was a fascist. If there's a fascist question in the exit polls and Trump goes off the dial and Harris ends up winning, people might go, oh yeah, it was a democracy election. So that's another potential one. Next one, old people. We all know they turn out en masse. We all know that the old people now are boomers. Like they're not the same old people that they used to be. They could be really left. If the left win the old people, that's significant. That's never happened that I know of, at least for a long time. And that could be significant as well. We might go, oh, why don't we stop focusing on the young people for a second and look at the old people who turn out twice as much as the young people do. Anyway, that might be the next bit of conventional wisdom. That's it. Trump's ceiling. People might go, Trump was never getting more than 47%. Trump never gets more than 47%. As soon as RFK pulled out, and that meant the third party vote was only going to be 2 or 3%, it meant that Harris was going to end up with more votes than Trump because Trump doesn't get more than 47%. Now, he may end up getting more than 47%, but if he doesn't, that will be the conventional wisdom.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, people will go, oh, of course, he never got more than 47%. We should have seen that coming. Money, you've already mentioned that. Yeah, and the ground game there all combined, $1.2 billion versus $400 million. That's quite a difference.
And also that amount of money overseen by very, very serious people.
Absolutely.
As opposed to being overseen by the Trump campaign.
Absolutely. Pollsters overcorrecting. We've been hearing over and over and again about pollsters desperately trying to find their hidden Trump voters. What if they've worked so hard to do this, they created some hidden Harris voters? We may look back, if the polls are wrong, we may look back on that in 3 weeks' time and go, geez, those polls were trying so hard to find those Trumpers. They screwed up the wrong way, and that's why Harris won. Transgender ad campaign. Maybe it backfired in a big way because it's never been supported by polling. You look at the polling that no one ever goes hard on the transgender issues, even though on individual issues, they don't poll terribly well. When you ask people broadly about discrimination and about transgender people, they're not thrilled with these ads. They don't like them. And it might not only have not helped, it might have undermined Trump's message in the last month because they went so hard on that ad campaign. So those are my conventional wisdoms if Harris wins. Here are some conventional wisdoms if Trump wins. The administration was unpopular. What did you expect? Biden has a 40% approval rating. They've got a 28% right track rating. Like, you're not going to win an election if 28% of the country thinks you're on the right track. I'm sorry. So that's one conventional wisdom.
Right.
Electoral college bias. We've known forever that there's a 3-point electoral college bias in the last decade or so. Kamala Harris has never been ahead by more than 3.5 points. And most of the time, she's been ahead by 1.5 or 2 points. Surprise, surprise, she loses. We saw that coming a mile away, they might say. Non-white voters. Democrats can't win without black and Hispanic voters. We all know that. They've been threatening to bolt for years. This time, they did. They lost just 10%, and that's enough to make the Democrats never be able to win an election. And this is a corollary of Democrats losing the working class, because it's the working class blacks and working class Hispanics that they lost. The Democrats are going to have to cut their losses right here, or they'll be out for a decade. I'm just
No, that happens every.
I'm just channeling the conventional wisdom if this happens. Low propensity voters. They're not counted in polls. We know that because they're not likely voters. We always knew that Trump excelled in low propensity voters. Every single poll says that. NBC polling says those who voted in 2020 and 2022, Harris leads 51-45. Those who voted only in 2020, Trump leads by 48-44. Those who voted in neither 2020 nor 2022, Trump leads them 50-40. If they show up to vote, they're going to blow the polls out of the water because none of them are counted in polls because none of them are likely voters.
Right.
Also, those whose interest in the election is 9 or 10 out of 10, the race is tied. For those whose interest in the election is 7 or 8 out of 10, Harris is up by 2 points. For those whose interest in the election is 1 point to 6 points out of 10, Trump's ahead by 16 points. If they show up, if any of them show up, that's going to make a difference. And they'll go, it was the low propensity voters. They're the ones that broke the polls. And finally, you mentioned it, but if Harris loses, they're going to be talking about Gaza, especially if she loses Michigan. They're going to go, oh, it's always going to cost her Michigan. There's at least 7,000 Americans abandoned in Lebanon at the moment who want to come home and are not coming home. The government's ballsed it up. Listen to Rashida Tlaib.
What a morning. We are up to 148 families, Americans that have ties to the 12th Congressional District. And one of them just broke our hearts this morning. Not because he's a veteran and served our country, but the fact that he broke down in tears, saying, does my 2 Purple Hearts mean anything to my country? To have to call and beg our government, the United States, to get this veteran home. They're making him leave his wife behind. They're like, we're not sure about your service dog. I mean, this is a man that served his country well, and he's now been abandoned in Lebanon. To have to beg for them to do what's right. With 140 plus other families, from a new mom of a 5-month-old that can't get them to get her child an emergency passport, to families after families saying, please don't leave us here. We don't know when the next bomb is coming. For us to have to, my team and I, to break down and yell and scream for our own government to save them is a disgrace. We need to do better. We knew this was coming, and we had no plan to get Americans out.
In addition to about 9,000 Palestinian Americans, Michigan is also home to 82,000 Lebanese Americans. What's happened for the last month? Lebanon versus Israel. The administration has a black eye over Gaza to begin with, and then throwing the Lebanese. Of course they were going to lose Michigan, the conventional wisdom might say. So that's all I've come up with so far.
That's good. And I have one more is Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
If she loses Pennsylvania by 5,000 votes, having not chosen Josh Shapiro.
Yes, of course. How did I forget that? You're right.
Yeah.
That's
a really great formulation. Yeah, I can't wait to see how that all happens.
Okay, now you got to go in 5 minutes.
I should go, yeah.
But you wanted to say something about John Tester before you go.
Just really quickly. This is obviously the race that is probably going to decide control of the Senate. The odds are now that John Tester, who's a longtime Democrat from Montana, I think Trump won Montana by 16 points 4 years ago. So obviously it's an uphill climb. Tester is a real, quote unquote, real Montanan. He's a big man. Montana's a big state. John Tester's a big man. He's got a lot of roots there, and people tend to like him. On the other hand, there's this new upstart. He's really smart. Now the only problem is he's another one of these subpar Republican candidates, and there's some mysterious story that when he was in the service, he apparently got wounded by some sort of stray bullet. It might have been friendly fire. According to him, he didn't report it. Okay, it happened. And then he was into some altercation in a national park, and he was in some hospital, and he told the people at the hospital, oh, he had this bullet because he discharged a gun in the national park. Okay, so he took the rap for that, and he got in trouble for discharging a gun in a national park. But he's obviously lying one way or the other. He's either lying about he got it when he was in service, or he's lying he did it in the national park. And of course, Tester's been doing a lot of campaigning on that. The one interesting thing about Montana is it's a pretty big libertarian state. Libertarian gets 3% of the vote last time, given the condition of the Republican candidate seems like it would hold at least. But the upshot is there was some hope that Tester was going to hold on to it, but he really might not. And so, of course, now the Democrats are maybe looking to Texas. Al Red is running a pretty good campaign about Cruz. He's within striking distance, but Cruz is still ahead. Hard to displace a senator in a place like Texas. On the other hand, Cruz nearly lost 6 years ago, and that was in a midterm election. So if this is a high turnout election, it could be that they actually squeak by with him. Al Red's a really good candidate.
The one I'm looking at is Nebraska.
Oh, interesting.
Dan Osborne, who's not a Democrat. He's an independent. He's trying very hard to distance himself from Democrats, but in fact, he's promised to not caucus with either side. Like he's promised to be an actual independent. So if he is indeed, if we have a situation where he wins, and I reckon I'd say he's more likely to win than Allred. I mean, I think Allred could win. I wouldn't rule it out. But I think Dan Osborne, he's not the favorite at all. but I'd say he's probably got I'd probably say Allred, in my view, is probably a 10, 15% chance. I reckon Osborne's maybe a 25% chance. If he wins and Harris wins the election and he's the 50th seat in the Senate, it'll be really interesting to see what he does in terms of who he supports for leader.
Yeah.
That could be, Australians might recall the situation where Julia Gillard won back in 2013 and she did a deal with the Greens and which sort of haunted her a bit. And there might have to be some kind of deal done, which might haunt whoever's in power at that point. Well, I suppose it'd be Harris.
They can put him in charge of a big, a rural, agricultural committee that would assuage 6 years from now.
Or maybe Labor, some kind of Labor committee, because he's a big unionist.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is that I reckon Dan Osborne might be the one to watch, but it's certainly a big effort from whoever is trying to get that 50th seat. I don't think it's going to be John Tester.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Bill,
anything else
thank
you
you,
want to say about the
Chaz.
election on your way out?
It's going to be really crazy, and good luck with Planet America next week.
Thank you very much. This has only been about 2 hours 15, so of course there's more coming after the white flash. I don't know if it's going to be here or it's going to be on Unleashed, but there's something coming, and I'll see you after the white flash, and I'll see you after the election.
I'll see you next week.
And I'll see all of you at some point in time when we're all staying peppy. Welcome to the other side of the white flash, and I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 topics for you here. Because we've got a bit of time. That first section was only a little over 2 hours, so I'll try and squeeze in 2 sections in an hour. Let's get to about 3 hours. First of all, before I do those topics, I just want to add a couple of extra things about the Madison Square Garden stuff, which didn't really have time to get in because I was trying to move things along. One more thing about why Tony Hinchcliffe sucked, in my view. What I think he was trying to do was really hard. I did talk to you about how you take a roast comedian out of the roast comedian environment and it doesn't work so well. But also, when you make edgy jokes and you're in a G-rated environment, it's tough because you don't want to be lame, but you know that there's just places you can't go. So you try to make a joke. They say, no, you can't make that joke. So then you dial it back, but not too far because you don't want to be lame. And on we go. It's this cycle of just being chiseled back further and further from where the joke works to something not quite right, but you're really keen to not make it lame. And it's like there's cliffs on either side of you that are getting closer and closer together, and you've almost got nowhere to go. It becomes a tightrope that you're trying to stay on, and in the end, you're in this weird in-between place, which is both. And it somehow ends up being both lame and too hardcore. This place sucks, and if you're a comedian, you don't want to perform in those environments because you end up in that place, and which is why Tony Hinchcliffe should have said no. I'm not saying the guy's a comedy god. Sometimes I like his stuff, sometimes I don't. But I do think that he is good at what he does, and what he does is not that. So he should have stayed away. Anyway, I also wanted to say that I played that Tucker Carlson excerpt long. I wasn't going to play it that long, but afterwards, when we were clipping it out, I thought, let's give you at least 3 minutes of this 5-minute rant. If you watch the whole back half of Tucker Carlson's speech online, you'll see I could have played the whole 5 minutes. It just went so long of that section, that back half there. But I wanted you to see what it's like. I want to see what Tucker's like, because it's very easy to just go, oh yeah, TV commentator, whatever. But firstly, he's a very good speaker, technically. He's compelling, he's charismatic, he's good at it. He's good at it in a way that a lot of people aren't good at it. Secondly, he's the master, the absolute master of a certain kind of populism. Not the Bernie Sanders kind of populism where it's like, yeah, we the people, let's unite to improve our conditions, yay. Not that kind of populism. The angry, resentful, corrosive, divisive kind of populism, which isn't necessarily asking for anything. It's primarily about setting your group against another group and tearing them down. Not lifting you up, tearing them down. He appeals to our dark side, and he does it really well. He gives you a permission to hate the other side in a way that Bernie Sanders would never do. Like Bernie Sanders, yeah, he'll talk about the billionaires and how the system's rigged, but then he'll focus on all the things we can do to fix it. Whereas Tucker Carlson would just luxuriate in the bad guys. He wants you to hate the other side, and he wants to fixate on why you should hate the other side and why you should feel good about hating the other side and why you should feel moral about hating the other side. That's the natural order of things. These people are evil. They're awful. You should hate them. If you're good, you will hate them. Other people play act as being that kind of rabble-rouser. Tucker is the real deal. And he energizes his side when he does it. The crowd were going nuts during that speech. They were screaming for most of that 5-minute section. And anyway, I really hope that guy never runs for office, because I don't know if he'll succeed or not. He may not. But I know that if he runs for office, he will leave the whole country in a far worse state than he found it. And so I just wanted you to see that speech, or at least a fair chunk of that speech, so you know what I'm talking about when I refer to that in the future. Okay, 2 sections. Firstly, I want to talk about failed October surprises. Let's go through them. There's a few of them. First of all, there's the Kamala Harris plagiarism scandal. Christopher Rufo, who we've talked about a few times, he found that Kamala Harris's 2009 book, Smart on Crime, A Career Prosecutor's Plan to Make Us Safer, had at least a dozen sections plagiarized in it. One part was even plagiarized from Wikipedia. Rufo had set a plagiarism hunter onto Harris, apparently, and seems to have paid off. Some of the plagiarized bits, yeah, they were quite small, but at least 5 of them were fairly substantial. And he published the receipts, like this section here, comparing a few paragraphs to the John Jay College of Criminal Justice excerpt. As you can see, it's pretty close to a perfect match. Honestly, I don't care about this controversy at all, and apparently most other people don't care either because it hasn't gone anywhere. Why don't I care? She had a co-author, Joan O.C. Hamilton. That's on the co-author, surely. No one expects the politician who has a co-author to carry the burden of actually writing a book. They're providing the name that sells the book, right? It's like a ghostwriter, except for we know her name. So any plagiarism is on the ghostwriter, is on the writer, not Kamala Harris. That's my take, at least. I don't know what yours is. JD Vance did have some fun at her expense with a tweet. Hi, I'm JD Vance. I wrote my own book, unlike Kamala Harris, who copied hers from Wikipedia. Okay. Then there were more allegations of plagiarism, as there always are. When you start, it's like Pringles. You just can't stop. I'll read from the Washington Free Beacon here. I'm saying I'm reading for it because I don't want to be accused of plagiarism. On April 24th, 2007, Harris testified before the House Judiciary Committee in support of a student loan repayment program. Virtually her entire testimony about the program was taken from that of another district attorney, Paul Logley of Winnebago County, Illinois. Harris devoted approximately 1,500 words to the program. Nearly 1,200 of them, or 80%, were copied verbatim from the statement Logley submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee on February 27th, 2007, 2 months before Harris delivered her testimony. Both statements cite the same surveys, use the same language, and make the same points in the same order, with a paragraph added here or there. They even contain the same typos, such as missing punctuation or mistaken plurals. Okay, do you know what you think about that? Me? I don't care. Yet again. And neither does the guy she supposedly plagiarized from. Logley, who, by the way, is a Republican, said he recalls the National District Attorneys Association researching and drafting his opening statement. This is a quote from him. Kamala Harris represented California state prosecutors as a member of the board of directors of NDAA, that's the National District Attorneys Association, and was testifying in that capacity. 2 months later, before the House Judiciary Committee, I believe she also relied on NDAA staff support for her opening statement. So he didn't write the piece, and she didn't write her piece. And they were relying on the same group of people writing both statements. And it wasn't creative writing. It wasn't meant to be some original piece. It was just testifying about state of facts. So there's no reason they can't just use the same words and the same everything for the same facts in two different environments. When it's the same people writing the speeches. Logley said exactly this. He said, the similar content of our statements was an effort by NDAA to be entirely consistent in the positions we presented to both houses of Congress on behalf of the 3,500 state and local prosecutors we represent on national level. So I think that's fine. And by the way, this guy, who was a Republican, was 100% cool with it. So if it's okay by him, it's okay by me. The third example was from November 2012, when she was Attorney General of California. She published a report on the state of human trafficking in California, and she cited a story that was courtesy of the Polaris Project. That's what they said, courtesy of, in the report. A non-profit, the Polaris Project is a non-profit that runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline. She copied that one of their case studies verbatim and wrote about it like it was real, when it was actually a made-up case study. Except she changed the location of the sex-trafficked woman from Washington to San Francisco. Honestly, I don't care about this either. She explicitly attributed it to the Polaris Project. The thing, the change she made is she turned something that wasn't real into something that was real, but she was telling a story. I don't think it really mattered, to be honest. Trump makes worse mistakes than that every sentence, let's face it. Like, she actually attributed it to the right source. Maybe it's possible she didn't even know it wasn't real, although she did change the location. Look, I just don't think that's a big deal at all. And to be honest, I worry a little bit about how hard people like Rufo now comb for material that they can use, because, I wonder how many of us are going to pass the Rufo test. The guy looks pretty hard. I'm not sure anyone who gives a lot of speeches would be capable of clearing that kind of hurdle. And I don't think it really achieves anything when they hit pay dirt either. They're not exposing plagiarists here. They're exposing people who have given thousands of speeches who at one point in time might have slipped up. And what I think it does do is A, create a culture of brazenness for genuine dodgy people to just brazen their way through these kinds of allegations, because we get used to people just ignoring it because everything's so technical and trivial. And B, it convinces potential politicians of merit that's not worth it, because they look at things like this and go, oh, geez, why did I put myself through this? And so I just don't like it much. And I mean, it's definitely too trivial for a presidential contest. So I can see why this didn't take off. But I tell it to you because maybe you do care about this. Maybe you think this should take off. Maybe you think this is valuable information about Kamala Harris. Well, I've given you the info. You make up your own mind on that. The next one, which didn't really take off, was the Trump groping claims. This is a story from a sports, a swimsuit model, Stacey Williams, that has been published in The Guardian, mostly just The Guardian. But the story first came out actually on a Zoom call for Kamala Harris. Zoom call was Survivors for Harris. And Stacey Williams was part of that call. And she told her story on that call. And then The Guardian spoke to her. And she's spoken to CNN since and a few other people, but hasn't really become a big thing. Stacey Williams, she said she dated Jeffrey Epstein for a while. She claimed to be sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. She says she first met Trump in 1992 at the Christmas party with Epstein. She then dated Epstein for a few months, and one day in winter or spring of 1993, Epstein brought her apparently to Trump Tower, where she said this happened. This is from the survivors for Harris Zoom call.
And so we went to Trump Tower and went up the elevator, and moments later, Trump was greeting us, and he pulled me into him and started groping me. He put his hands all over my breasts, my waist, my butt, and I froze. And I froze because I was so deeply confused about what was happening, because the hands were moving all over me. Yet these two men were like smiling at one another and continuing on in their conversation. Jeffrey and I left, and I got into the elevator with him, and I felt this, like, he didn't look at me, he didn't speak to me, and I felt this like seething rage around him. His whole energy shifted. And when we got down to the sidewalk, he looked at me and started just berating me. He kept saying, "Why did you let him do that? Why did you let him put his hands all over you? What?" And he made me feel so disgusting. And I remember at that moment being so utterly confused. Number one, I thought, well, yeah, why did I let him do that? And then I was confused because, well, but why is Jeffrey mad? Because he's the one that took me up there. And I was also confused because I was someone who really prided myself as being sort of one of the tough models who was problematic, because I fought back against the predators in the industry. I defended fellow models on the streets of Paris when we would be grabbed or harassed. So how did I let that happen? I felt so humiliated and so sick to my stomach and was so upset. And as I absorbed what happened a few minutes later, I felt like that was some sort of sick bet or game between the two of them. I was rolled in there like a piece of meat for some kind of challenge or twisted game. And I felt horrendous.
And she broke up with Epstein soon after that incident. Now, the first thing people might be thinking of when they hear this story is the famous Trump Access Hollywood tape when Trump said,
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy.
To me, it's very reminiscent of that tape. What evidence have we got? Well, the first thing people will ask, of course, is why she didn't come forward sooner. This happened 30 years ago. Trump has been around for a long time now in the public with accusations being made against him for groping people. So why didn't she come forward sooner? Well, this is what she said on CNN.
Williams says she did not tell anyone about the incident for over 10 years.
I felt a wave of shame, and I just couldn't think about it, face it, talk about it for a very long time. I put it in a little box inside of me, turned the key, locked it.
CNN has spoken to 3 friends of Williams to corroborate her story, who each said that she told them about the incident with Trump and Epstein in 2006, 2015, and 16.
She also said that she later received through her agent a special postcard from Trump in 1993 showing an aerial view of his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, including a handwritten message on the back. You can see that message right there. I'm showing it to you right now if you're watching the video. It reads in Donald Trump-esque handwriting with that, the famous black marker, "Stacey, you're home away from home. Love, Donald." Now, Trump's press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, says these accusations made by a former activist for Barack Obama and announced on a Harris campaign call 2 weeks before the election are unequivocally false. It's obvious this fake story was contrived by the Harris campaign. And look, It's true she did volunteer for Obama's campaign, and it's true that the timing really stinks. When things occur in October, I always say you should be extra suspicious. The timing is not conducive to trust. There are also a few other problems. Trump's signature on the card appears different to another signature that has been unsurfaced. There's supposedly Trump's signature from the 90s. I will show you the signature again on the card and then the signature that's supposedly Trump's signature from the 90s. And this is them next to each other. Now, I wouldn't necessarily, I keep on saying supposedly and alleged, because I wouldn't necessarily assume that that supposed Trump signature from the 90s is actually Trump's signature from the 90s. This is all from Twitter. It's unconfirmed. But I'll just float that as a possibility because a lot of people seem very confident and I haven't been able to confirm one way or another. We'll just flag that as potentially a point. Potentially. Also, in the survivors for Kamala Call, she said this.
Late winter, early spring of 93, I was on a walk with Jeffrey from his brownstone on the Upper East Side down Fifth Avenue when Jeffrey looked at me and said, let's go stop by and see Trump.
But Epstein didn't buy that brownstone until 1996, after Stacey Williams had broken up with Epstein. So, if you have a faulty memory, and I could totally understand having a faulty memory if say, he bought that brownstone later in their relationship and she confused the memories, but if he bought that brownstone long after she broke up with him, so she may never have even been in that brownstone, it's a bit harder to confuse your memory that way. I don't know. Her testimony seems credible to me. It seems in character with Trump. It seems in character with Epstein. It all checks out. She seems to be grounded to me. I'm not bothered by her keeping the postcard. I understand that. It's her bit of evidence that happened and that she's not crazy. And by the way, the card looks old. I mean, I know you can fake that stuff, but it does look old. The signature concerns, they may or may not be real. I don't know what I think about that. The brownstone bit, that definitely gives me some pause, I have to admit. As well as just the general level of partisanship in America and so on, turning up 2 weeks before the election. But I'll say this. The allegations to me seem certainly possible. I'm definitely open to those allegations, but I'm not 100% sure. I just honestly don't know what I think about it. I could see either way. And often that's the case with these kinds of allegations. You can say, yeah, they're credible allegations, and and we should take them seriously because they do seem credible. But I'm not 100% sure that I do believe them. I just don't know. Either way, I don't think these are going to make much difference in this election. I don't know what you think about them. You can make up your own mind. I just want people to be aware of the allegations and the evidence behind them. Okay, next October surprise that doesn't seem to have gone anywhere is the Tim Walz molestation case. Now, the first person to accuse Tim Walz of being a groomer was, of course, Laura Loomer. That's what she does. The day after Walz was appointed Harris's VP nominee, Laura Loomer very responsibly came forward and tweeted, "Wait till reporters start asking the gay bar owners in Minnesota about Tim Walz. There's a reason why he shakes his wife's hand and panders to the gay community, and it's not because he's awkward. It will all come out." I know that's not necessarily saying he's a groomer, it's just saying he's gay, but over the ensuing days, she became clearer in what she was implying. Classic Loomer. That was way back when, like a few months back. But then, former Florida deputy sheriff turned Kremlin propagandist John Duggan, D-O-U-G-A-N, I'm going to call him Duggan, started this iteration that we're referring to now. Now, this guy Duggan's got a lot of form when it comes to misinformation. He's started 171 pro-Kremlin faux news sites. 171. And he's now moved to Moscow, which is never a great sign. There were documents obtained by a European-based intelligence agency that show Duggan accepting payments from an officer with Russia's foreign military intelligence agency and communicating with figures linked to Russian President Vladimir Putin's regime. He says that he's an independent whistleblower journalist, though, and that's why this fellow contacted him. Because, of course, if you've been abused by your teacher 30 years ago and they end up being a vice presidential nominee, the person you'd want to speak to share your story and give you credibility would be some dude who is pretty much unknown except for being a prolific source of misinformation from Moscow. That's who you'd talk to. You wouldn't go and talk to, say, NBC News or Fox News or whatever. No, you talk to a random dude who no one's heard of, who is only known for printing misinformation. That would be your go-to source, of course. So Duggan interviewed this anonymous victim on a podcast that no one had heard of, possibly even smaller than PEP, if that is indeed possible. And they altered his voice. This was on October 5. Their podcast is called Red Pill 78. I thought PEP was an inaccessible name. Red Pill 78 podcast interviewed this anonymous victim with the altered voice. Now, the anonymous man claimed to be a former foreign exchange student of Walz's from Kazakhstan. And he was a student in 2004 at Mankato West High School, participating in the US State Department-funded Future Leaders Exchange Program, otherwise known as the FLEX program. Now, the guy said his relationship with Walz started when he was upset after class one day, and he said some of his personal possessions had been taken. Walz supposedly took the guy into an empty classroom and touched his shoulder, back and butt as a sign of support. He also supposedly did this in a swimming pool. So that's the story, except the US State Department told NewsGuard it has no record of any foreign exchange student from Kazakhstan in the Mankato area from 2000 through to 2020. None. Zero. When NewsGuard asked Duggan for some evidence of this guy's identity, Duggan showed them a cropped photo of a US visa issued in Kazakhstan that had no identifying details. Duggan said, "I don't trust you to not disclose the information to the FBI or CIA." No offense. 2 days after that podcast, the Miami Chronicle began tweeting about it. Pretty impressive stuff. You've finally hit the big time with the Miami Chronicle, except that is one of Duggan's 171 fake news sites. They started tweeting the podcast to prominent conservatives on Twitter, tagging them, desperately, sweatily trying to get their attention. Did you see the exchange student from Kazakhstan who gave the interview about how he was sexually groomed by Tim Walz? It's really shocking. This is a vetted former exchange student who goes into great details. Elon Musk needs to hear about this. That kind of thing, like just calling for Elon to please pay attention. And he just did it to lots of people, just try and get them to notice. And then 5 days later, on October 12th, it was being amplified by major conservative accounts like Juanita Broaddrick. She's the person who accused Bill Clinton of raping her back in the 70s. Also Shadow of Ezra, another big account. Aka Facehots, and you probably haven't heard of them, but they're actually a big account. They got like 400 and something thousand followers, and they just turn up in every right-wing thread. Honestly, that dude just seems to tweet literally all day. He makes Elon Musk seem restrained. And so when he starts spreading things, they get around because all these people are all like this little group that sort of feed off each other, human centipede style, and he is a key part of the centipede. Also, importantly, DocNet YouTube got involved in this one, and we've talked about DocNet YouTube before. For those who don't remember, DocNet YouTube is also known as Black Insurrectionist, and Black Insurrectionist was spreading a claim a few months back that an ABC America whistleblower had filed an affidavit claiming that the ABC debate was rigged. He published the affidavit, the Black Insurrectionist, in full. And it was a huge joke. I talked about it on this podcast. At one point, the affidavit described Harris as previously being the Attorney General of San Francisco, a position that doesn't exist. And the affidavit read like it was written by someone who had not only was not a lawyer, they had never even watched Law and Order, they hadn't even watched Ally McBeal. These people had no idea about law at all in any way, shape or form. But yet, it convinced a lot of super gullible conservatives that it might be true. In particular, Bill Ackman, the internet's most gullible person, was harassing Disney boss Bob Iger on Twitter to respond to this because it seemed so credible. Megyn Kelly was going on about it, and she was an actual lawyer. How she could fall for thinking that this could be at all credible, I have no idea. The affidavit said the copy had been sent to the Speaker for the House, and that the affidavit writer had tapes proving his allegations. Megyn Kelly later confirmed that Mike Johnson never received that letter, and surprise, surprise, the tapes were never released. Anyway, Black Insurrectionist then claimed to have interviewed the victim, Tim Walz's victim, and he printed a number of emails, except those paragraphs in the emails weren't aligned perfectly like an email is. It looked like they'd just been typed into a document to look like an email with lots of space bars everywhere. And then there was a cursor on one of the emails, supposed emails, that the cursor was on the screen cap. It was like he screen capped the doc right after he wrote it and didn't bother to move the cursor off. And the dates of the emails sometimes had commas and sometimes they didn't from the same email program. It was extremely dodgy. There was a 0% chance these were real emails. I found this hilarious when I saw it, and yet people took it seriously again. But then, just after Black Insurrectionists published these scandalous emails proving that Tim Walz was a child molester, then someone called Matthew Metro showed up on Twitter to tell his story, which I'll play a minute out of. Here's Matthew.
He gave me this very worried look, and he said, "I know what your real problem is, and you have nothing to be ashamed of." I was confused. Seeing me confused, he said, "I know how you feel about men, because I feel the same way too. And I can help you." He placed his hand on my knee and said, "It is okay, don't be afraid." He moved even closer, his hand reaching up, almost touching my couch. I froze at that moment. I couldn't grasp what was happening. Maybe he thought my silence meant I gave him a consent. But I just couldn't move. He unzipped my pant, his hand rubbing my genitals. I couldn't hear what he was saying. She started kissing my neck. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 15 seconds. Maybe 5 minutes. I just couldn't tell.
Now, spoiler, that's not the real Matthew Metro. We'll get to that in a second. But that account, that Twitter account, had some of the real Matthew Metro's bio details on it absolutely correct. If someone tried to cross-check and fact-check whether it was real or not. The profile image on the bio was of the real Matthew Metro, who that person you just saw was not. And the account user set the location to Hilo, Hawaii, where the real Matthew Metro lives. And the account was not new. It'd been around for a year. But if you look through the history, until a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about Tim Walz, it was all dog videos, completely generic. So clearly they'd set up a generic account for a year, just leaving it for when they wanted to use it. And they could just change it to whatever they wanted. The X account's post containing this video was viewed more than 5.4 million times in the next 22 hours. It became big. It was promoted by Jack Posobiec, promoted by Candace Owens, amongst others. Big conservatives. A story then that referenced the Red Pill 78 interview, the Black Insurrectionist emails, and the Matthew Metro video was published on over 100 of Duggan's faux news websites simultaneously. They went big on this one and they spread it as hard as they could. And then the real Matthew Metro came forward, and he wasn't that guy. In the video, he was this guy. You can see the before and after there, courtesy of the Washington Post. Thank you. And the real Matthew Metro said he had never met Tim Walz. That guy in the video, whoever that is, has been reported as being AI from Russian misinformation. Apparently, he's not AI. People have run checks on him, and he's real. But he's just an actor, I guess. But that video is still up on Twitter. I just took it from Twitter yesterday, even though everyone knows it's fake, because that is what Twitter is like these days. Then, after all this, when Matthew Metro came forward and the shit hit the fan, then Black Insurrectionist just disappeared into thin air. Bye-bye, Black Insurrectionist. Such a shame. You had so many more reliable takes for us all. According to Wired, Black Insurrectionist was run by the Russian-aligned network called Storm 1516. Now, Storm 1516 has a long history of posting fake whistleblower videos, deep fake videos, fake documents, all in the cause of pushing Kremlin talking points to the West. NBC says they're responsible for at least 50 conspiracies in the last year alone, often undermining Ukraine and doing obvious work for Russia. But then AP said they found Black Insurrectionist. His name was Jason Palmer, this 51-year-old guy who's been accused of defrauding his business partners and whose home was raided by the FBI over a decade ago. He owes $6.7 million in back taxes to the state of New York. He's an all-round dodgy fellow. And this guy acknowledged in an email that he was involved with the account, but said he did not create it. And by the way, the AP had evidence that he was behind his account. Like there's a couple of times he'd included in, without realizing it, things like his initials, his username on various accounts, and like you just saw there were clues in his posts. They did a good job, AP, in tracking him down. Anyway, he said that he sold the account in April or May to a person who he declined to identify. Could that be Storm 1516? Maybe. But then again, he also said he participated in making claims about Walz that were posted to the account this month. And he also said that he worked as a researcher with a broader group. Quote, "We did that with big people, national people," he said. "I have no comment on anything else regarding that." Could they have been linked to Storm 1516? Maybe. But everything this guy says sounds like he's full of shit. I'm not sure I'd believe anything he said. Maybe he's working with Storm 1516. Maybe he's not. I don't know. But that is all we know about this story. The important points are, obviously, it's all bullshit. That's important. But also, this fake story ended up getting pushed by multiple different people and sources all at once, which made it seem more credible to gullible people. And that's a key, because that's going to happen again and again. If you're the kind of person who thinks, oh, if it's from one source, that might be untrue. But if it's from 10 different sources, well, it must be credible. Where there's smoke, there's fire. If you're one of those people, get ready to get fooled by a lot of stories in the future, because they've now invented a new technique which involves seeding these stories to multiple sources at once and them all going together. The next thing to note is even after this was all debunked, Twitter did zero to deal with any of these people. Most of the materials I referred to are still up. And anything that isn't still up, it was taken down by the people themselves, like Black Insurrectionists. Twitter didn't take anyone down. Even those people who were fraudulent and clearly breaking the law and were clearly bad faith operators. Twitter didn't touch any of them. So what this Tim Walz stuff is a real indication of where we're going. This is, I think, the scariest of these examples. Like, I talked about Christopher Rufo pushing us into a place I'm uncomfortable with, but at least all that's real. It might be nitpicking, it might be abrasive, and it might be a kind of political warfare, but at least it's all real. This is something else entirely, and this is concerning. And it didn't even involve AI. Just wait till we've got AI being involved as well. So that's that story. And finally, I just want to update you on the Emhoff slap story. I've spoken in previous pods about allegations against Doug Emhoff. They slapped a woman who was dating when he was drunk and jealous at an event. One of the main issues with that story was that we were only hearing from 3 acquaintances of the woman, but not the woman herself. Well, the Daily Mail has now convinced her to come forward, but she's still anonymous. So we're hearing quotes from her, but they're anonymous quotes. She provided more pictures of Emhoff and her. She also provided more documentation supporting that Emhoff was definitely at that event in Cannes. There's a lot of gossipy detail of their relationship in this article. I'm not going to bother with that. It doesn't really matter. The relevant bit starts at when they're at a line for a cab at 3 a.m. after the event. I'm going to read you her account now, her anonymous account of this incident. I decided I'm going to go up to the valet and give him $100 to get out of this line. I put my hand on the valet's shoulder and tell him, with my $100, could you please get me a car as soon as possible? As I'm talking to him, Doug got out of the line, comes up, turns me around by my right shoulder. I'm completely caught off guard. I'm not bracing. I'm in 4-inch heels, wearing a full-length gown, and it's between 2 to 3 a.m. He slaps me so hard, I spin around, and I'm in utter shock. There had been no fight, no argument. It had been a completely fantastic event. I'm so furious. The only thing I could think to do was slap him back. I slapped him on one side and on the other cheek with the other hand. In that moment, his mask had dropped and I saw his dark side. Metaphorical mask, obviously. All of a sudden, the car is there. The valet is ushering me in. I intended to go back to the hotel without him, so I was shutting the car door, but he forced his way into the car, which I did not want. It's dark. I don't speak French. My friends were with her, off having an amazing time. I'm embarrassed and humiliated that this amazing experience turned into this violent spectacle. I can't believe he just slapped me. I think I said to him in the car, "What the hell is wrong with you? Why did you do that?" And the only thing I could get out of him was he thought I was hitting on the valet. She said she called a businessman friend in New York from the cab to tell him what just happened. The friend confirmed that call to the Daily Mail. She said, "This was the first time I saw Doug's ugly side. I was in a shock. I wanted somebody to know where I was and what happened. I was freaked out because I thought I knew this person, but I don't, and he's in the car with me. I also wanted Doug to see me on the phone telling somebody." She also said why she was coming forward. She said it was because, well, kind of coming forward, she's anonymous. She said it was because Emhoff was being lauded as a feminist. Quote, "What's frightening for a woman that's been on the other end of it is watching his completely fabricated persona being portrayed. He's been held out to be the antithesis of who he actually is, and that is utterly shocking. Every time I see Doug on TV portraying the persona of a perfect spouse and non-toxic man, I wonder if Nagin is watching too and feeling as disgusted as I am." Nagin is the nanny that Doug Emhoff admits to having an affair with, whose pregnancy then ended subsequently in mysterious circumstances. Right, I don't know what you think about that. I'm starting to be sold on this one. I believe her. I know the timing is unfortunate. I know that 2 weeks before the election, although this story first came out about another 3 weeks ago, so a bit over a month before the election. I know she's still anonymous, but I don't know, this all rings true to me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Whatever you think. But, for what it's worth, I'm leaning this way. I can't be 100% sure, but I'm leaning towards believing her. Anyway, this hasn't taken off, this story anyway. So those are all the October surprises that didn't really happen. I mean, they happened, but they weren't much of a surprise. They didn't go anywhere. One more big section I'd like to go through now, and this is something I've been flagging for a while because I think this is a huge topic and I cannot believe this hasn't been a bigger topic in the election. I just wanted to sneak this in before the election to make sure that we're all on the same page on this one. It is time for...
What time is it?
It's policy time.
What time is it?
It's policy time. Bum, 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 bum. And this policy is one of the two big ones, deportations. But before we do policy time on deportations, let's do a stats nugget on immigration. It's a one-line stat, but this is a beauty. It's from a 2017 CMS study. That's the Center of Migration Studies. In 2014, about 4.5 million US residents, or 42% of the total undocumented population, 42% were overstayers. Not people who crossed the border, not people who paid cartels, people who had valid visas, holiday visas, business visas, and then didn't go home. 42%. And if those numbers are anywhere like that now, the 4.5 million numbers, it's still about somewhere between, 30 and 50% of the illegal immigrants now are overstayers. We never hear about them. That to me is an amazing stat. They never get vilified. We never hear about overstayers raping little children and murdering them. It's just a massive section of the issue of illegal immigration that we just never talk about. And now we're not going to talk about them either because we're going to go back into deportations. All right. In my view, this should be Harris's prime message. I have no idea why she never mentions this because to me, it sums up the bad side of Trump perfectly. This policy is a combo of authoritarianism with economic illiteracy, with promises to do things that he absolutely is not going to deliver on. It's a combo of all three of them. And let me go into some detail. First of all, we should talk about the polling. This might be why Kamala Harris doesn't talk about it. It's actually relatively popular compared to what it used to be. The idea of mass deportations used to be incredibly unpopular. It used to get like 20 to 30% approval. Well, now it gets 56% approval. According to Pew in September, that's majority support. 56% of Americans strongly or somewhat support the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. So that Harris is a very cautious person. That might be why she is staying away from it. Pew also found in September that 88% of Trump supporters support mass deportations, unsurprisingly. 27% of Harris supporters do, which, that's a large number of Harris supporters to support something as draconian as mass deportations. That's 27%. Not too long ago, that was the overall support for mass deportations. Now that's Harris supporters alone. But that support is actually very vulnerable when you dig a bit deeper into the numbers. That same Pew poll, saying it had 56% support, found that 70% of all registered voters support admitting immigrants in to address labour shortages. The whole principle of this deportation is to stop them taking all the jobs, according to J.D. Vance. But 70% of Americans said, let's get the immigrants in to address labour shortages. Even more so, 75% in that same poll said that illegal immigrants mostly take jobs citizens don't want. That's the opposite of what J.D. Vance says. Even 59% of Trump supporters said that illegal immigrants mostly take jobs citizens don't want. So what's the problem with them then? In August, about 6 in 10 registered voters said that undocumented immigrants should be allowed to stay in the country legally if certain requirements are met. 60%. So how does that work? 56% are in favour of mass deportation, but about 60% say they should be able to stay legally if certain requirements are met. Weird, contradictory. And 58% favoured allowing undocumented immigrants to legally work and stay in the country if they're married to a US citizen. So a majority of people want them deported, but the majority of people are happy for them to stay and work legally if they're married to a US citizen. These groups, they unsurprisingly overlap. Two majorities have to overlap, but they overlap a lot. About 40% of registered voters who support mass deportations also support a policy that would allow undocumented spouses of US citizens to remain in the country. About a third of Trump supporters who back mass deportations support such a plan, while about 60% of Harris supporters who back mass deportations also support such a plan. And it's the same, by the way, the same basic numbers for certain requirements being met. About a third of Trump supporters back allowing unauthorized immigrants to stay in the country if certain requirements are met. Hispanics? The same, but even more so. According to the New York Times, 67% of Hispanics back the pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants currently living in the United States, while 45% supported deporting immigrants living illegally in the US. So amongst Hispanics, 45% support deporting all those immigrants, while 67% supported giving all those immigrants a pathway to citizenship if they wanted it. So, bottom line, these guys are open to persuasion. Even though a majority supports mass deportation, they are definitely open to persuasion if only Kamala Harris had tried, or Joe Biden before her had tried. No one ever tries to convince people this is a bad idea, even though Trump has been saying this for a decade. Particularly vulnerable, by the way, on the polling are people coming out against the DACA kids. The DACA kids, remember, are the kids who are the DACA kids who were born overseas or born in another country and were dragged into America by their parents when they were little kids and have grown up effectively as Americans since then. And now they have a job or they're part of the army and they have no criminal record. So they're perfect citizens. Those people. Okay, so a September Ipsos poll found 54% supported the mass deportation plan generally, but 68% supported a pathway of citizenship for undocumented immigrants who arrived in the US as children. Super popular. An NBC Telemundo poll found, same with Hispanics, is in September, 45% support for deportations. 87% of Hispanics backed the pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants brought as children to the US, the DACA kids. 91% supported that pathway for undocumented spouses. And by the way, J.D. Vance didn't rule out deporting the DACA kids last week. Harris campaign didn't say a thing that I saw about that when J.D. Vance said that. To be clear, he didn't say let's deport them, but he was asked about whether he would rule out deporting them and he refused to answer the question. He dodged it. All right, so that would have made DACA kids, I think, quite uneasy. Anyway, the point is, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden should have argued against this long ago because the polling suggests they could have won this debate. And now it's too late. So let's talk about the deportations that are going to happen in some capacity if Trump wins this election in 8 days' time. What would it take to achieve deporting all the unauthorized immigrants? Well, for a start, there's about 12 to 13 million of them. There were 11 million until quite recently, until 2 years ago, and the speculation is about 2 million since then. Vance likes to say there are 25 million of them. He said that at the debate. So the first thing it would take to deport them all is to have an abacus and to learn how to count. But once we've done that and we've established that there's 12 to 13 million of them, then you need a massive deportation force. Even carrying out 1 million arrests per year, which would smash every record in the past, would require ICE to hire over 30,000 new law enforcement agents and staff, instantly making ICE the largest law enforcement agency in the federal government. And it would cost way more. Trump has said he also plans to mobilize local law enforcement and National Guard to get involved. Putting an increased ICE, which they'd have to get funding for, by the way, from Congress. The filibuster would stop that. But anyway, combining a massively increased ICE with mobilised local law enforcement and National Guard, will that get it done? Maybe. Although some local law enforcement leaders have already declared they're not going to participate in mass deportation efforts. We know about sanctuary cities where they don't participate with federal government immigration enforcement measures. Well, that would be, shall we say, accelerated somewhat. That would be on steroids if they started deporting every single unauthorized immigrant as well. But look, I'm sure plenty of local law enforcement would help out in the red states. So we'll see. I don't know. Either way, Trump will have to pay them for their efforts. So that will cost some serious cash. You also need a lot of flights, a lot of flights. According to the 2023 ICE report, it costs it costs nearly $3,000 to remove each person from the country. $3,000. So if Trump wants to fly 13 million people out, that's $40 billion just for the flights alone. That's almost 4 times ICE's total 2023 budget. Mind you, that will probably spread over 10 years because they're not going to do all this in 1 year. That's at 1 million arrests. If it's 1 million arrests a year, that's 13 years actually. But where's he getting this money from for all these flights if the Democrats don't want to play ball? That's just one part of the cost. It also costs ICE money to track people down and to keep them in custody before their deportation. This is actually a huge part of the cost. ICE currently has about 40,000 beds in detention centres. If you want to deport 1 million people a year, you're going to need a lot more beds in detention centres. Each bed costs $57,000 a year, by the way, to maintain. Hundreds of thousands, at least thousands of new detention facilities are going to be required to arrest, detain, process, and remove immigrants. It's estimated costing about $66 billion per year if you spread it out over a long period. That's a lot of money, right? Also, courtrooms, immigration officers, facilities, an estimated $12 billion per year will be required to carry out just the legal processing for arrestees. These are all per year. So over 10 years, that's approaching many hundreds of billions of dollars. American Immigration Council tried to game this all out, add up all these numbers, see where they're at. They're estimating about $967 billion over 10 years, and that's a conservative estimate. So it'll be well over $1 trillion, I suspect, it would cost to do this, if it's even possible. It would probably cost way more because they're not considering how much bribing these foreign countries is going to cost as well. Because remember, you got to convince countries to take these migrants back. A lot of them come from countries that won't take anyone back, which is the reason they're still in America for. We have discussed this before. So you need to do some serious, both carrots and sticks. They're going to cost money. So we're talking over $1 trillion, right? Okay, so that's the cost. If it's possible. Is it legal to do? Well, Trump has a plan.
I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Think of that. 1798. That's when we had real politicians that said we're not going to play games. We have to go back to 1798.
So, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 that Trump has cited there was last used to intern the Japanese in World War II. You don't want to be using that law. But he does. Well, he is. It allows the president to arrest, imprison, or deport immigrants from a country considered an enemy of the US during wartime without the usual due process. You can just round people up and imprison them without them taking you to court. So, and the key part about this is that would then stop his deportation push being tied up by a court, because honestly, the shit they're going to have to do, it's going to be breaking a lot of China. There are going to be a lot of appeals in court. But if they use this law, then they don't need to worry about that. So theoretically, that's great for him, except it seems like a poor fit because America is not at war with any of these countries. So how would this act apply in this case? How would this apply from people from Mexico, which is an ally of America? Not just they're not at war, but they're friends. You know what? He could get away with it because courts are extremely deferential to the executive branch when it comes to immigration enforcement, especially this Supreme Court. This Supreme Court was very deferential to Biden, very deferential to Trump on these matters. I mean, look, they did draw some lines, and they might draw a line here, but I wouldn't count on it. Is it legal? Is it not going to be legal? Well, the first 6 months will be, well, there won't be a lot of deporting going on. Well, there might be some deporting going on, but there won't be a lot of the mass roundups because there will be one big court case to determine if it's legal or not. It will take 6 months to get to the Supreme Court, and then we will see what happens. And then they will decide. This might be the big shocking ruling of the next term. They will decide if this program's going to go forward or not, and we will find out. I don't want to guess. Honestly, after the immunity ruling, I don't want to guess. So maybe it's legal. I don't think so. Maybe. What about repercussions? Let's start with the economic repercussions. Labour shortages, and they're the most obvious repercussions. Lawful immigrants make up about 22 million workers in America. As of 2022, there were 8.3 million unauthorised immigrants who were working in America. So that's up from 7.4 million in 2019. Show you the graph right there. But it's basically to what it was, back to what it was in 2007. That's in 2022. Now, there might be more now. People think there's been about two and a bit million unauthorized immigrants who have been let into the country since then. And so let's say, I don't know, 1.5 million of them are workers. Let's say 10 million workers. Something like that. It's a bit of an approximation, okay? The industries with the most unauthorized immigrant workers in them, as of 2022, construction, 13% of the entire industry are illegal immigrants. Agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, 12% of the entire industry are illegal immigrants. Leisure and hospitality, 7% of the entire industry. The jobs with the most unauthorized immigrant workers were drywall/ceiling tile installers and tapers. 33% of the people in that job, illegal immigrants, because it's a shit job. Roofers, 32% are illegal immigrants. Painters and paper hangers, 28% are illegal immigrants. Other agricultural workers, 24%. Construction labourers, 24%. Maids and housekeeping cleaners, 24%. So get ready for huge labour shortages in those jobs I just read out. Construction, I think, is the key there. Remember, those jobs are already struggling for workers. That's why unauthorised immigrants can get jobs there. Because if you've got 1 million natives going for the same job, you're going to pick the native than the unauthorized immigrant because they speak better English, they've got better training, there's all kinds of, they're more attuned to the culture, they're more likely to be able to fit in. There's a whole bunch of reasons that you would obviously pick a native-born employee over an unauthorized immigrant, and also, not to mention the legal issues. So the fact they're filled with unauthorized immigrants tells you people don't want those jobs. So when you get rid of the unauthorized immigrants, there's a shortage. In a survey conducted this September, 77% of construction firms with job openings and 74% of those in Texas, construction firms with job openings, they reported they were struggling to fill those jobs. US Chamber of Commerce found that Texas has just 80 workers for every 100 open jobs, full stop. Even if tomorrow all the jobs were filled by new people, especially in that construction industry, it could take years of training to get these newcomers up to speed. So that means far fewer homes and businesses would be built in those years. You'd have higher prices for houses and office buildings. This would create all those jobs left open would create serious general supply chain blockages. According to the American Immigration Council, deploying 13 million people would shrink America's annual GDP by 4.2% to 6.8%. Annual GDP. That's one hell of a recession. According to the Peterson Institute, deporting 1.3 million people would cost 1.2% of GDP by 2028. And deporting 8.3 million people would cost 7.4% of GDP by 2028. Then you've got the CBO projections of current immigration rates right now, without any deportations. $0.9 trillion, $900 billion less debt by 2034. And while they projected lower wages for a few years, they projected higher wages in the last few years of that period. And that, all that I've just said, especially the smaller GDP, would lead to less workers for natives. A Peterson Institute study found that for every 1 million undocumented workers deported, 88,000 American-born workers lose their jobs. That's worth bearing in mind. So that's the first economic consequence. The second economic consequence is endangering Social Security. Undocumented immigrant households, perversely, given what Trump says, he says just they're going to bankrupt Social Security. They don't get Social Security. It's impossible for them to bankrupt Social Security. But they pay taxes into Social Security. Undocumented immigrant households paid $46.8 billion in federal taxes and $29.3 billion in state and local taxes in 2022 and $22 billion to Social Security in 2022 alone in 1 year and $5.7 billion to Medicare in 1 year without taking any benefits from Social Security or Medicare because they're not allowed to. So they are subsidizing the systems. And the Social Security budget crunch, which we all know is coming, probably in the next term after this one. It's going to get worse if you remove them from the picture because they are subsidizing the system. They're the economic costs. What about the non-economic costs? 22 million people live in mixed immigration status households in America. That's a lot of people. 5 million American citizen children live with an undocumented family member. There's a pretty good chance if that undocumented family member is one of their parents, if they get deported, that child gets pushed into poverty. 5 million extra American children in poverty. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And that's all assuming that the deporters don't make any mistakes, don't accidentally deport someone they don't mean to deport or someone who's legally should be there but just doesn't have the documents at the right time, someone who may have a visa or someone who kind of seems like an illegal immigrant but they just can't find the evidence to prove otherwise. I'm not sure Trump has been overly precise about this issue, to be honest. This was him talking about the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio.
We will do large deportations from Springfield, Ohio. Large deportations. We're going to get these people out. We're bringing them back to Venezuela. And we're going to have the largest deportation in the history of our country. And we're going to start with Springfield and Aurora.
Those migrants in Springfield are almost certainly entirely legal. Some are on temporary protection visas. Some are just legal residents now. But one thing they're not is from Venezuela. They're from Haiti. Oh my God, this guy. So they might make some mistakes. I hope eyes aren't that bad, but they've made mistakes before. They can make them again. So this entire system of deportation, mass deportation, it has its critics. It really does. Like, for instance, in 2012, when noted deportation critic J.D. Vance wrote, "Think about it. We conservatives rightly mistrust the government to efficiently administer business loans and regulate our food supply, yet we allegedly believe they can deport millions of unregistered aliens? The notion fails to pass the laugh test." I agree, old J.D. Vance. Back in 2016, by the way, he tried to get that taken down unsuccessfully. So I guess that's when he decided he was going to follow an interesting path. All right, what about the costs of immigration, though? We're talking about the cost of deportation. What are the costs of immigration? Well, there is the migrant crime that Trump has discussed repeatedly, which, as we keep on saying, is at a lower rate than native-born crime. But he's right when he says zero of that migrant crime would exist if they weren't in America. That's true. Those are crimes that would not exist if those migrants weren't there. So that's a cost. Another cost is that if we're being honest and fair, the economic models show that low-skilled immigrants offer a lot fewer economic benefits than higher-skilled immigrants. And they can be a fiscal drain, especially when they first come to America. They can be. They don't get Social Security or Medicare, but they do get access to a bunch of government spending. It's true. But they work as well. So they're not a big fiscal drain. They're a little fiscal drain. The Manhattan Institute has found that the average migrant, legal or illegal, actually reduces the federal budget deficit by $10,000 each over their lifetime. Now, that's because the legal immigrants and the high-skilled illegal immigrants reduce the federal budget deficit by much more than $10,000. It averages out to $10,000. Okay, so admittedly, there are some people who are a drain fiscally. But here's the important thing. By deporting them now, you've already swallowed all the upfront costs when they first came, but you're reducing the benefits that are going to be received down the pipeline, because the longer they stay, the more they work. The costs are at the beginning, the benefits are later on. So you get all the costs and none of the benefits. So that's not very smart. So this will actually also increase the deficit, relatively speaking. Okay, this is where, to be fair, we really need to listen to J.D. Vance's idea on how you replace these workers, because he's come up with a scenario which at least it sounds like a very logical response. There are plenty of native-born Americans who are not in the labour force who will take those jobs if only the illegal immigrants aren't taking them. And greedy employers can't lean on those and rely on those illegal immigrants to take those jobs. Let's listen to what he has to say.
They might not want to work in construction.
The unemployment rate does not count labor force participation dropouts. And again, this is one of the really deranged things that I think illegal immigration does to our society, is it gets us in a mindset of saying we can only build houses with illegal immigrants when we have 7 million, just men, not even women, just men who have completely dropped out of the labor force. People say, well, Americans won't do those jobs. Americans won't do those jobs for below the table wages. They won't do those jobs for non-living wages. But people will do those jobs. They will just do those jobs at certain wages. And think about this from the perspective of an American company, okay? I want them to go searching in their own country for their own citizens. Sometimes people who may be struggling with addiction or trauma, get them re-engaged in American society. We cannot have an entire American business community that is giving up on American workers and then importing millions of illegal laborers. That is what we have thanks to Kamala Harris's border policies. I think it's one of the biggest drivers of inequality. It's one of the biggest reasons why we have millions of people who have dropped out of the labor force. Why try to re-engage an American citizen in a good job if you can just import somebody from Central America who's going to work under the table for poverty wages? It is a disgrace, and it has led to the evisceration of the American middle class.
Now, what Vance just talked about there, these men who just don't participate in the labour force, he's right about them. And there are more of them now than there used to be. He's 100% right. That is a phenomenon. They're called the missing men. We have talked about them on Planet America at least 3 times. I'm obsessed with the missing men. I think they are one of the biggest social problems facing America right now. In fact, on Friday, this Friday coming up, 2 days' time, I have already conducted an interview where I have discussed the missing men with yet another person as part of the reason why there are these angry, resentful men who are supporting some of the MAGA types. I see the missing men as a big issue. I agree with J.D. Vance on that. But there are already 8 million available jobs out there right now. Even with the illegal immigrants here. Why don't the missing men take those jobs? They're there. If we can't convince them to take those jobs, why will we be able to convince them to take the crappier jobs that the illegal immigrants are currently taking. And this is not new, by the way. He blamed Kamala Harris for this. That's bullshit. The missing men are not because of illegal immigration. They're not because of Harris. They've been around since the 60s. This has been happening for 60 years. In high immigration periods, in low immigration periods, in recessions, before and after NAFTA, before and after China entering the WTO. This has got nothing to do with immigration, got nothing to do with free trade. This is a broad, mysterious trend that is, broadly speaking, getting worse over time. Look at the graph. This is the labour force participation of 25 to 54-year-old men. You can see it moves in cycles, just like the economy does, but those cycles are moving in one obvious direction, and that is less participation over time. Who these people are and why they aren't working, we don't know. I severely doubt it isn't because they're being underpaid by a few dollars an hour, though. People who research this, and there are people who research this, like Nicholas Eberstadt from the American Enterprise Institute, he's been talking about this for a decade, and he's really good at this topic. He thinks that the prison is probably related. People who've been from the ex-cons who've just been screwed up. Poor education in lower class areas might be related. The family falling apart might be related. Actually, you'll notice in that graph, look at that graph again. The trend of missing men has actually been reversed just slightly under Biden for the first time in decades. Ironically, they're saying that Biden and Harris are the problem. There's actually a higher participation rate of 25 to 54-year-old men right now than there's been for a while. If we deport 10 million workers, that means there's going to be 18 million unfilled jobs. How do you fill 18 million unfilled jobs with 7 million men? No matter how much you raise their wages, it's not going to work. This, J.D. Vance has hit on a real problem. The solution is not the one he's suggesting. He's found a leaky, he's found a leaky faucet, a real leaky faucet that needs to be fixed. The dude's carrying a hammer. It ain't going to work. Also, this is just the beginning, this deportation strategy. Trump wrote a post recently, which I'll read out to you. As president, I will immediately end the migrant invasion of America. We will stop all migrant flights, end all illegal entries, terminate the Kamala phone app for smuggling illegals, CBP One app, revoke deportation immunity, suspend a refugee resettlement, and return Kamala's illegal migrants to their home countries, also known as remigration. I will save our cities and towns in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all across America. MAGA 2024. Now, you might go, why did I read that out to you? That sounds pretty standard. I want you to focus on the bit where he says, return Kamala's illegal migrants to their home countries, also known as remigration. Steve Miller shared that post, and he added, the Trump plan to end the invasion of small-town America, remigration, all in caps because he's so enthusiastic. He was like a little schoolgirl skipping through the daisies. Just imagine that, if you will, Steve Miller as a little schoolgirl skipping through the daisies, possibly with a blonde wig with plaits on it. I'm sorry, I know you'll never sleep again. Trump, as always, doesn't know what he's talking about. Remigration has a specific meaning. It's a European right-wing term for the forcible return of non-ethnically European immigrants and their families, regardless of their actual citizenship. It's about basically using either legal or coercive means to just get immigrants away, or non-ethnically European immigrants out of the country by any means necessary to try and save the culture of that country. Now, Trump probably doesn't know that because it's a very obscure term in America at the moment. Steve Miller absolutely would know that. He probably has the word remigration on a poster in his wall. And Steve Miller, I'm sure, would be the person who told Trump about remigration, which is why he was so enthusiastically tweeting about it. Steve Miller, that is. And he's probably trying to till the soil for the next push. Because, once again, that's how Steve Miller rolls. The one guy we know is going to be involved in Trump's next term, and he's going to be involved in immigration. So that's my thoughts about this whole area. I want to leave you with one more thought. This is what I think actually is the biggest problem. And there's an article here, which I'm going to include. I'll include in the blurb, the homework. Have a look if you're interested, because I think it's a really interesting thought. The problem for me is the mindset problem. Trump and Vance, I mean, there's a lot of problems. There's a humanitarian problem, obviously, and there's an economic problem, obviously, but I actually think there's also just a mindset problem. Trump and Vance are trafficking in scarcity rather than abundance. They are looking at what is left over, and they're looking at who might want what's left over, and they're trying to divide people and argue over who gets the spoils of what's left over. Rather than thinking, no, we're in a state of abundance. We can grow to the point where everybody can get a piece of the pie. We can make the pie bigger. They're not thinking about making the pie bigger. They're thinking about fighting over the pie that exists. And that is a recipe for endless infighting, which then leads us to this great piece from The Atlantic, which is about what they call Malthusian thinking. Malthusian thinking is what is referring to Thomas Malthus, who was an economist back in the 1800s, I believe. Maybe he made it to the 1900s. I think it was largely in the 1800s. And he had the idea, maybe even 1700s. I should have looked that up beforehand. I did study him at school, but that was many decades ago. Thomas Malthus famously had a very pessimistic view about economics, about there was just going to be too many people for too few resources, and things were going to be horrible as a result. I'm going to read you a quote from the article. There are fundamentally two ways to respond to scarcity. There is the Malthusian way, or Malthusian thinking, a fierce defense of the existing resource pool, a politics that demands ever more scapegoats and leaves everyone poorer in the long run. Then there is liberalism, which demands a growing pie. It argues that we can make more housing, more schools, more good jobs, enough for everyone. This wasn't always possible. Scarcity used to be the depressing fact of human existence. Malthus was looking back at an era of human history during which GDP per capita was extremely low, and population growth meant strain on existing resources, eventually leading to population decline. It was a horrible, depressing cycle that pitted family against family, tribe against tribe. There really wasn't enough food to feed everyone, or enough energy to warm everyone. Rising populations meant new mouths to feed. New mouths to feed meant declining living standards for all. But then, there's not a quote, there's a paraphrase, the Industrial Revolution happened, and it kept happening. And it's happened ever since. And it means that we don't need to worry about scarcity anymore. At least until we hit a brick wall with the environment, potentially, if we're not smart. The political logic is another quote from the article. The political logic of tolerance works only once society is out of the scarcity trap. Anti-immigration hawks insist on zeroing in on increased short-term demand for housing because of immigration. They refuse to zoom out and see the whole picture. American economic growth is predicated on higher levels of immigration. According to the National Foundation for American Policy, international migrants were the sole source of growth in the US working age population in 2021 and 2022. A shrinking working age population can easily lead to economic stagnation or even falling standards for the entire nation. Fewer people means less innovation. It means fewer goods and services produced. It means higher prices and shortages. Yet liberals have forgotten the central importance of fighting against scarcity, and the logic of Malthusian thinking has crept back in. I think that is 100% spot on as to what is happening in America at the moment. The problem about this is it becomes a cycle. It becomes a cycle. If you start fighting over the scraps and things start to shrink, then there's more people fighting over fewer scraps and you fight harder. And if you boot out one group of people, then there's still going to be too many people fighting over scraps. And then you're fighting over that even harder because this is after all the hard times, after you've booted out all the immigrants. And you've been fighting for longer and you're bitterer. And let's say you steal some of the scraps from one other group and then they try and steal them back. And all the time you're shrinking. This is a spiral. This is a spiral to the results that Malthus saw in the future, and they weren't positive results. Get off that track. We've been doing very well off that track for the last 200 years. Let's stay off that track, please. The irony of this is that this is exactly what conservatives like J.D. Vance and Trump would accuse Greens of pushing for years. When Greens talk about, no, we need to have renewable energy now, 100% now, tomorrow. And they talk about reducing population, so we reduce resources. And they talk about degrowth. Conservatives, they just go crazy. They go, what are we doing? Why are we on this path to nowhere when we can keep on developing and growing? They criticize environmentalists for exactly that thought. And now they're doing that same thought themselves with immigration. That's not from the article. That's just my own little addition. By the way, if you're asking what my thoughts are on that point of view of environmentalism, because you guys know that I'm a little bit obsessed with climate change, so you might be wondering what my view is on the degrowth theory. I think that I'm not convinced that has to be the only way. I don't think you need to have runaway growth all the time. But I'm not convinced that we have to keep on moving to lower and lower levels of growth and economic standing. I'm not sure that that's required. I certainly think that we'll make the world cleaner a lot faster if it's done in a way that keeps people prosperous. If you're asking people to take a living standards cut, especially people in third world countries, in order to be environmental, they're not going to be environmental. They're just not going to do it. So I think realistically, if you care about climate change, you need to make it commercial and you need to make it harmonious with economic growth as soon as we possibly can to make sure we have a zero carbon economy as soon as possible and we don't have to fight with each other in order to get there. It will just happen naturally if we can make this harmonious with economic growth, which, by the way, I think we can. I don't think that's a problem. I think alternative energy, solar energy and stuff, that's going to work. That's going to work. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen in a way that is harmonious with economic growth. So I'm not pessimistic in that regard. But I am pessimistic when it comes to immigration. If America goes down the low immigration route and starts going down this path towards Malthusian thinking. Anyway, that's about enough for now. We've been going for over 3 hours, so you got plenty of value. I know I went pretty long, but there's only a few days until the election. I want to make sure we cover everything off. This was a big topic. There's another big topic coming up on Friday about taxes, which I want to make sure I cover as well before the election. So that's all there's going to be. This podcast and the Friday podcast is going to last us till the election and, in fact, till the Friday after that. So I hope you enjoy that. Before I go, I know I didn't get to I did promise on Planet America a couple of back on Friday that I'd be talking about the tax break, the theory of the issue about expats in America paying American taxes while they are living overseas. I haven't gotten to that. Honestly, it's just very hard to sandwich this in with all this other stuff that we've really got to cover before the election. So I might push that to after the election, either the podcast directly after the election or the podcast after that. I have done a lot of work going through all your feedback. So I've got plenty to say about that. And we may, if we have time, even get an interview in with a lawyer who knows about this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to put that on the shelf, put it on the pinboard until after the election. I haven't forgotten it. And also, at some point in time soon, I'll be doing correspondence again. Until Friday, though, stay peppy.